If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
In 1143, Pope Celestine VI ordered the Knights Hospitaller to take over management of a German hospital in Jerusalem, which, according to the chronicler Jean Dypres, accommodated the countless German pilgrims and crusaders who could neither speak the local language nor Latin. Patriae linguam ignorantibus ac Latinum. Although formally an institution of the Hospitallers, the Pope commanded that the prior and the brothers of the Domus Teutonicorum, House of the Germans, should always be Germans themselves, so a tradition of a German-led religious institution could develop during the 12th century in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. After the loss of Jerusalem in 1187, some merchants from Lübeck and Bremen took up the idea and founded a field hospital for the duration of the Siege of Acre in 1190, which became the nucleus of the order. Pope Celestine III recognized it in 1192 by granting the monks Augustinian rule. However, based on the model of the Knights Templar, it was transformed into a military order in 1198, and the head of the order became known as the Grand Master, Magister Hospitalis. It received papal orders for crusades to take and hold Jerusalem for Christianity and defend the Holy Land against the Muslim Saracens. During the rule of Grand Master Hermann von Salza, the order changed from being a hospice brotherhood for pilgrims to primarily a military order. The order was founded in Acre, and the knights purchased Montfort Castle, northeast of Acre, in 1220. This castle, which defended the route between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean Sea, was made the seat of the Grand Masters in 1229, although they returned to Acre after losing Montfort to Muslim control in 1271. The order received donations of land in the Holy Roman Empire, especially in present-day Germany and Italy, Francocratia, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, elevated his close friend Hermann von Salza to the status of Reichsfürst, or Prince of the Empire, enabling the Grand Master to negotiate with other senior princes as an equal. During Frederick's coronation as King of Jerusalem in 1225, Teutonic Knights served as his escort in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Von Salza read the Emperor's proclamation in both French and German. However, the Teutonic Knights were never as influential in Outremer as the older Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller. In 1211, Andrew II of Hungary accepted the services of the Teutonic Knights and granted them the district of Burzenland in Transylvania, where they would be exempt from fees and duties and could administer their own justice. Andrew had been involved in negotiations for the marriage of his daughter with the son of Hermann, Landgrave of Thuringia, whose vassals included the family of Hermann von Salza. Led by a brother called Theoderic or Dietrich, the order defended the southeastern borders of the Kingdom of Hungary against the neighbouring Cumans. Many forts of wood and mud were built for defence. They settled new German peasants among the existing Transylvanian Saxon inhabitants. The Cumans had no fixed settlements for resistance, and soon the Teutons were expanding into their territory. By 1220, the Teutonic Knights had built 5 castles, some of them made of stone. Their rapid expansion made the Hungarian nobility and clergy, who were previously uninterested in those regions, jealous and suspicious. Some nobles claimed these lands, but the order refused to share them, ignoring the demands of the local bishop. After the Fifth Crusade, King Andrew returned to Hungary and found his kingdom full of resentment because of the expenses and losses of the failed military campaign. When the nobles demanded that he cancel the concessions made to the knights, he concluded that they had exceeded their task and that the agreement should be revised, but did not revert the concessions. However, Prince Bela, heir to the throne, was allied with the nobility. In 1224, the Teutonic Knights, seeing that they would have problems when the prince inherited the kingdom, petitioned Pope Honorius III to be placed directly under the authority of the Papal See, rather than that of the King of Hungary. This was a grave mistake, as King Andrew, angered and alarmed at their growing power, responded in 1225 by expelling the Teutonic Knights, although he allowed the ethnically German commoners and peasants settled here by the order to remain, and these became part of the larger group of the Transylvanian Saxons. Lacking the military organization and experience of the Teutonic Knights, the Hungarians failed to replace them with adequate defense against the attacking Cumans. Soon, the steppe warriors would be a threat again. In 1226, Conrad I, Duke of Masovia in northeastern Poland, appealed to the knights to defend his borders and subdue the pagan Baltic Old Prussians, allowing the Teutonic Knights use of Chełmno land as a base for their campaign. This being a time of widespread crusading fervor throughout Western Europe, Hermann von Salza considered Prussia a good training ground for his knights for the wars against the Muslims in Outremer. With the Golden Bull of Rimini, Emperor Frederick II bestowed on the order a special imperial privilege for the conquest and possession of Prussia, including Chełmno land with nominal papal sovereignty. In 1235, the Teutonic Knights assimilated the smaller order of Dobrzyn, which had been established earlier by Christian, the first bishop of Prussia. The conquest of Prussia was accomplished with much bloodshed over more than 50 years, during which native Prussians who remained unbaptized were subjugated, killed, or exiled. Fighting between the Knights and the Prussians was ferocious. Chronicles of the order state the Prussians would roast captured brethren alive in their armor, like chestnuts, before the shrine of a local god. The native nobility who submitted to the Crusaders had many of their privileges confirmed by the Treaty of Christburg. After the Prussian uprisings of 1260 to 1283, however, much of the Prussian nobility emigrated or were resettled, and many free Prussians lost their rights. The Prussian nobles who remained were more closely allied with the German landowners and were gradually assimilated. Peasants in frontier regions, such as Samland, had more privileges than those in more populated lands, such as Pomesania. The crusading knights often accepted baptism as a form of submission by the natives. Christianity along Western lines slowly spread through Prussian culture. Bishops were reluctant to have pagan Prussian religious practices integrated into the new faith, while the ruling knights found it easier to govern the natives when they were semi-pagan and lawless. After 50 years of warfare and brutal conquest, the end result was that most of the Prussian natives were either killed or deported. The order ruled Prussia under charters issued by the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor as a sovereign monastic state, comparable to the arrangement of the Knights Hospitallers in Rhodes and later in Malta. To make up for losses from the plague and to replace the partially exterminated native population, the order encouraged immigration from the Holy Roman Empire, mostly Germans, Flemish and Dutch, and from Masovia, Poles, the later Masurians. These included nobles, burghers and peasants, and the surviving Old Prussians were gradually assimilated through Germanization. The settlers founded numerous towns and cities on former Prussian settlements. The order itself built a number of castles, Ordensburgen, from which it could defeat uprisings of Old Prussians, as well as continue its attacks on the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland, with which the order was often at war during the 14th and 15th centuries. Major towns founded by the order included Thorn, Kulm, Allenstein, Elbing, Memel and Königsberg, founded in 1255 in honor of King Ottokar II of Bohemia on the site of a destroyed Prussian settlement. After suffering a devastating defeat in the Battle of Soli, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword were absorbed by the Teutonic Knights in 1237. The Livonian branch subsequently became known as the Livonian Order. Attempts to expand into Rus failed when the Knights suffered a major defeat in 1242 in the Battle of the Ice at the hands of Prince Alexander Nevsky of Novgorod. Over the next decades, the order focused on the subjugation of the Curonians and Semigallians. In 1260, it suffered a disastrous defeat in the Battle of Durb against Samogitians, and this inspired rebellions throughout Prussia and Livonia. After the Knights won a crucial victory in the Siege of Königsberg from 1262 to 1265, the war had reached a turning point. The Curonians were finally subjugated in 1267, and the Semigallians in 1290. The order suppressed a major Estonian rebellion from 1343 to 1345, and in 1346 purchased the Duchy of Estonia from Denmark. The Teutonic Knights began to direct their campaigns against pagan Lithuania due to the long-existing conflicts in the region, including constant incursions into the Holy Roman Empire's territory by pagan raiding parties, and the lack of a proper area of operation for the Knights. After the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at Acre in 1291, and their later expulsion from Hungary. At first, the Knights moved their headquarters to Venice, from which they planned the recovery of Outremer. This plan was, however, soon abandoned, and the order later moved its headquarters to Marienburg, so it could better focus its efforts on the region of Prussia. Because Lithuania Propria remained non-Christian until the end of the 14th century, much later than the rest of Eastern Europe, the conflicts were dragged out over a longer time, and many knights from Western European countries, such as England and France, journeyed to Prussia to participate in the seasonal campaigns, race, against the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In 1348, the order won a great victory over the Lithuanians in the Battle of Strava, severely weakening them. In 1370, it won a decisive victory over Lithuania in the Battle of Ruda. Warfare between the order and the Lithuanians was particularly brutal. It was common practice for Lithuanians to torture captured enemies and civilians. It is recorded by a Teutonic chronicler that they had the habit of tying captured knights to their horses and having both of them burned alive, while sometimes a stake would be driven into their bodies, or the knight would be flayed. Lithuanian pagan customs included ritualistic human sacrifice, the hanging of widows, and the burying of a warrior's horses and servants with him after his death. The knights would also, on occasion, take captives from defeated Lithuanians, whose condition was extensively researched by Jacques Heers. The conflict had much influence in the political situation of the region and was the source of many rivalries between Lithuanians or Poles and Germans. The degree to which it impacted the mentalities of the time can be seen in the lyrical works of men such as the contemporary Austrian poet Peter Suchenwirth. Overall, the conflict lasted over 200 years, although with varying degrees of active hostility during that time, its front line extending along both banks of the Niemen River, with as many as 20 forts and castles between Seregius and Jurbarkas alone. A dispute over the succession to the Duchy of Pomerania embroiled the order in further conflict at the beginning of the 14th century. The Margraves of Brandenburg had claims to the duchy, which they asserted after the death of King Wenceslaus of Poland in 1306. Duke Władysław I, the elbow high of Poland, also claimed the duchy, based on inheritance from Przemysław the Second, but he was opposed by some Pomeranians nobles. They requested help from Brandenburg, which subsequently occupied all of Pomerania except for the citadel of Gdańsk in 1308. Because Władysław was unable to come to the defense of Gdańsk, the Teutonic Knights, then led by Grand Master Siegfried von Feuchtwangen, were called to expel the Brandenburgers. The order, under a Prussian Landmeister Heinrich von Treitschke, evicted the Brandenburgers from Gdańsk in September 1308, but then refused to yield the town to the Poles, and according to some sources massacred the town's inhabitants, although the exact extent of the violence is unknown, and widely recognized by historians to be an unsolvable mystery. The estimates range from 60 rebellious leaders, reported by dignitaries of the region and knight chroniclers, to 10,000 civilians, a number cited in a papal bull of dubious provenance that was used in a legal process installed to punish the order for the event. The legal dispute went on for a time, but the order was eventually absolved of the charges. In the Treaty of Solding, the Teutonic Order purchased Brandenburg's supposed claim to the castles of Gdańsk, Świecie, and Czech and their hinterlands from the Margraves for 10,000 marks on the 13th of September 1309. Control of Pomerania allowed the order to connect their monastic state with the borders of the Holy Roman Empire. Crusading reinforcements and supplies could travel from the imperial territory of Hither Pomerania through Pomerelia to Prussia, while Poland's access to the Baltic Sea was blocked. While Poland had mostly been an ally of the Knights against the pagan Prussians and Lithuanians, the capture of Pomerelia turned the kingdom into a determined enemy of the order. The capture of Gdańsk marked a new phase in the history of the Teutonic Knights. The persecution and abolition of the powerful Knights Templar, which began in 1307, worried the Teutonic Knights, but control of Pomerelia allowed them to move their headquarters in 1309 from Venice to Marienburg, Malbork, on the Nogat River, outside the reach of secular powers. The position of Prussian Landmeister was merged with that of the Grand Master. The Pope began investigating misconduct by the Knights, but no charges were found to have substance. Along with the campaigns against the Lithuanians, the Knights faced a vengeful Poland and legal threats from the papacy. The Treaty of Calais of 1343 ended the open war between the Teutonic Knights and Poland. The Knights relinquished Kujawia and Dobrzynland to Poland, but retained Chełmnoland and Pomerelia with Gdańsk. In 1236, the Knights of St. Thomas, an English order, adopted the rules of the Teutonic Order. A contingent of Teutonic Knights of indeterminate number is traditionally believed to have participated at the Battle of Legnica in 1241 during the first Mongol invasion of Poland. The combined Polish-German army was crushed by the Mongol army and their superior tactics, with few survivors. In 1337, Emperor Louis IV allegedly granted the order the imperial privilege to conquer all Lithuania and Russia. During the reign of Grand Master Heinrich von Treitschke, 1351-1382, the order reached the peak of its international prestige and hosted numerous European crusaders and nobility. King Albert of Sweden ceded Gotland to the order as a pledge, similar to a fiefdom, with the understanding that they would eliminate the pirating Victual brothers from this strategic island base in the Baltic Sea. An invasion force under Grand Master Conrad von Jungingen conquered the island in 1398 and drove the Victual brothers out of Gotland and the Baltic Sea. In 1386, Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania was baptized into Christianity and married Queen Jadwiga of Poland, taking the name Władysław II Jagiełło and becoming King of Poland. This created a personal union between the two countries, and a potentially formidable opponent for the Teutonic Knights. The order initially managed to play Władysław II Jagiełło and his cousin Vytautas against each other, but this strategy failed when Vytautas began to suspect that the order was planning to annex parts of his territory. The baptism of Jogaila began the official conversion of Lithuania to Christianity. Although the crusading rationale for the order's state ended when Prussia and Lithuania had become officially Christian, the order's feuds and wars with Lithuania and Poland continued. The Lizard Union was created in 1397 by Prussian nobles in Chełmno land to oppose the order's policy. In 1407, the Teutonic Order reached its greatest territorial extent and included the lands of Prussia, Pomerania, Samogitia, Courland, Livonia, Estonia, Gotland, Osel, and the Neumark, pawned by Brandenburg in 1402. In 1410, at the Battle of Grunwald, a combined Polish-Lithuanian army, led by Władysław II Jagiełło and Vytautas, decisively defeated the order in the Polish-Lithuanian Teutonic War. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen and most of the order's higher dignitaries fell on the battlefield. The Polish-Lithuanian army then began the siege of Marienburg, Malbork, the capital of the order, but was unable to take Marienburg owing to the resistance of Heinrich von Plauen. When the first Peace of Thorn was signed in 1411, the order managed to retain essentially all of its territories, although the knights' reputation as invincible warriors was irreparably damaged. While Poland and Lithuania were growing in power, that of the Teutonic Knights dwindled through infighting. They were forced to impose high taxes to pay a substantial indemnity, but did not give the cities sufficient requested representation in the administration of their state. The authoritarian and reforming Grandmaster Heinrich von Plauen was forced from power and replaced by Michael Kuchmeister von Sternberg, but the new Grandmaster was unable to revive the order's fortunes. After the Golub War, the Knights lost some small border regions and renounced all claims to Samogitia in the 1422 Treaty of Melno. Austrian and Bavarian knights feuded with those from the Rhineland, who likewise bickered with Low German-speaking Saxons, from whose ranks the Grand Master was usually chosen. The western Prussian lands of the Vistula River Valley and the Brandenburg Neumark were ravaged by the Hussites during the Hussite Wars. Some Teutonic knights were sent to battle the invaders, but were defeated by the Bohemian infantry. The knights also sustained a defeat in the Polish-Teutonic War 1431 to 1435. In 1440, the Prussian Confederation was founded by gentry and burghers of the state of the Teutonic Order. In 1454, it rose up against the order and asked Polish King Casimir IV the Gielon to incorporate the region into the Kingdom of Poland, to which the king agreed and signed an act of incorporation in Krakow. Mayors, burghers and representatives from the region pledged allegiance to the Polish king during the incorporation in March 1454 in Krakow. This marked the beginning of the 13 Years' War between the Teutonic Order and Poland. The main cities of the incorporated territory were authorized by Casimir IV to mint Polish coins. Much of Prussia was devastated in the war, during the course of which the order returned Neumark to Brandenburg in 1455 to raise funds for war. Because Marienburg Castle was handed over to mercenaries in lieu of their pay and eventually passed to Poland, the order moved its base to Königsberg in Sambia. In the Second Peace of Thorn, 1466, the defeated order renounced any claims to the territories of Gdańsk, Eastern Pomerania, and Chełmno land, which were reintegrated with Poland, and the region of Elbląg and Malbork, and the Prince-Bishopric of Warmia, which were also recognized as part of Poland, while retaining the eastern territories in historic Prussia, but as a fief and protectorate of Poland also considered an integral part of one and indivisible Kingdom of Poland. From now on, every Grand Master of the Teutonic Order was obliged to swear an oath of allegiance to the reigning Polish king within 6 months of taking office. The Grand Master became a prince and councillor of the Polish king and the Kingdom of Poland. After the Polish-Teutonic War, 1519-1521, the order was completely ousted from Prussia when Grand Master Albert of Brandenburg converted to Lutheranism in 1525. He secularized the order's remaining Prussian territories and assumed from his uncle Sigismund, the Old, King of Poland, the hereditary rights to the Duchy of Prussia as a personal vassal of the Polish crown, the Prussian homage. Ducal Prussia retained its currency, laws and faith. The aristocracy was not present in the same. Although it had lost control of all of its Prussian lands, the Teutonic Order retained its territories within the Holy Roman Empire and Livonia, although the Livonian branch retained considerable autonomy. Many of the imperial possessions were ruined in the German Peasants' War from 1524 to 1525 and subsequently confiscated by Protestant territorial princes. The Livonian territory was then partitioned by neighbouring powers during the Livonian War. In 1561, the Livonian master Gotthard Kettler secularized the southern Livonian possessions of the order to create the Duchy of Courland, also a vassal of Poland. After the loss of Prussia in 1525, the Teutonic Knights concentrated on their possessions in the Holy Roman Empire. Since they held no contiguous territory, they developed a three-tiered administrative system. Holdings were combined into commanderies that were administered by a commander, Comptor. Several commanderies were combined to form a bailiwick, headed by a Landkommter. All of the Teutonic Knights' possessions were subordinate to the Grand Master, whose seat was in Bad Mergentheim. The order gradually lost control of these holdings until, by 1809, only the seat of the Grand Master at Mergentheim remained. Following the abdication of Albert of Brandenburg, Walter von Kronberg became Deutschmeister in 1527, and later administrator of Prussia and Grand Master in 1530. Emperor Charles V combined the two positions in 1531, creating the title Hoch- und Deutschmeister, which also had the rank of Prince of the Empire. A new Grand Magistracy was established in Mergentheim in Württemberg, which was attacked during the German Peasants' War. The order also helped Charles V against the Schmalkaldic League. After the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, membership in the order was open to Protestants, although the majority of brothers remained Catholic. The Teutonic Knights became tri-denominational, with Catholic, Lutheran, and Reformed bailiwicks. The Grand Masters, often members of the great German families, and after 1761, members of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, continued to preside over the order's considerable holdings in Germany. Teutonic Knights from Germany, Austria, and Bohemia were used as battlefield commanders leading mercenaries for the Habsburg monarchy during the Ottoman Wars in Europe. The military history of the Teutonic Knights was to be ended in 1805 by the Article 12 of the Peace of Pressburg, which ordered the German territories of the Knights converted into a hereditary domain and gave the Austrian Emperor responsibility for placing a Habsburg prince on its throne. These terms had not been fulfilled by the time of the Treaty of Schönbrunn in 1809, and therefore Napoleon Bonaparte ordered the Knights' remaining territory to be dispersed to his German allies, which was completed in 1810.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
You're watching the Everything Network. In the early 1050s, a kind of triumvirate emerged in leading the Almoravid movement, including Abdallah ibn Yasin, Yahya ibn Umar, and his brother Abu Bakr ibn Umar. The movement was now dominated by the Lamtuna rather than the Gudala. During the 1050s, the Almoravids began their expansion and their conquest of the Saharan tribes. Their first major targets were two strategic cities located at the northern and southern edges of the desert, Sijilmassa in the north and Odegost in the south. Control of these two cities would allow the Almoravids to effectively control the trans-Saharan trade routes. Sijilmassa was controlled by the Magrawa, a part of the northern Zenata Berber Confederation, while Odegost was controlled by the Soninki. Both cities were captured in 1054 or 1055. Sijilmassa was captured first and its leader, Masud ibn Wanuddin, was killed, along with other Magrawa leaders. According to historical sources, the Almoravid army rode on camels and numbered 30,000, though this number may be an exaggeration. Strengthened with the spoils of their victory, they left a garrison of Lamtuna tribesmen in the city, and then turned south to capture Odegost, which they accomplished that same year. Although the town was mainly Muslim, the Almoravids pillaged the city and treated the population harshly on the basis that they recognized the pagan king of Ghana. Not long after the main Almoravid army left Sijilmassa, the city rebelled and the Magrawa returned, slaughtering the Lamtuna garrison. Ibn Yasin responded by organizing a second expedition to recapture it, but the Gudala refused to join him and returned instead to their homelands in the desert regions along the Atlantic coast. Historian Amira Benison suggests that some Almoravids, including the Gudala, were unwilling to be dragged into a conflict with the powerful Zenata tribes of the north, and this created tension with those like Ibn Yasin, who saw northern expansion as the next step in their fortunes. While Ibn Yasin went north, Yahya ibn Umar remained in the south in the Adrar, the heartland of the Lamtuna, in a defensible and well-provisioned place called Jabal Lamtuna, about 10 kilometers northwest of modern Attar. His stronghold there was a fortress called Azugi, also rendered variably as Azugi or Azuki, which had been built earlier by his brother Yanu ibn Umar al-Hajj. Some scholars, including Attilio Gaudio, Christian Vanacker, and Brigitte Himpen and Diane Himpen Sabatier, describe Azugi as the first capital of the Almoravids. Yahya ibn Umar was subsequently killed in battle against the Gudala in 1055 or 1056, or later in 1057. Meanwhile, in the north, Ibn Yasin had ordered Abu Bakr to take command of the Almoravid army, and they soon recaptured Sijilmassa. By 1056, they had conquered Taroudant and the Sa Valley, continuing to impose Maliki Islamic law over the communities they conquered. When the campaign concluded that year, they retired to Sijilmassa and established their base there. It was around this time that Abu Bakr appointed his cousin, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, to command the garrison of the city. In 1058, they crossed the High Atlas and conquered Agmat, a prosperous commercial town near the foothills of the mountains, and made it their capital. They then came in contact with the Bargawata, a Berber tribal confederation who followed an Islamic heresy preached by Salih ibn Tarif 3 centuries earlier. The Bargawata occupied the region northwest of Agmat and along the Atlantic coast. They resisted the Almoravids fiercely, and the campaign against them was bloody. Abdullah ibn Yasin was killed in battle with them in 1058 or 1059 at a place called Kurafalalt or Kurafala. By 1060, however, they were conquered by Abu Bakr ibn Umar and were forced to convert to Orthodox Islam. Shortly after this, Abu Bakr had reached as far as Meknes. Towards 1068, Abu Bakr married a noble and wealthy Berber woman, Zainab and Nafsawiya, who would become very influential in the development of the dynasty. Zainab was the daughter of a wealthy merchant from Kairouan who had settled in Agmat. She had been previously married to Lakut ibn Yusuf ibn Ali al-Maghrawi, the ruler of Agmat, until the latter was killed during the Almoravid conquest of the city. It was around this time that Abu Bakr ibn Umar founded the new capital of Marrakesh. Historical sources cite a variety of dates for this event ranging from 1062, given by Ibn Abizar and Ibn Khaldun, 1078, given by Muhammad al-Idrisi. The year 1070, given by Ibn Adhari, is more commonly used by modern historians, although 1062 is still cited by some writers. Shortly after founding the new city, Abu Bakr was compelled to return south to the Sahara in order to suppress a rebellion by the Gudala and their allies which threatened the desert trade routes in either 1060 or 1071. His wife Zainab appears to have been unwilling to follow him south, and he granted her a divorce. Apparently, on Abu Bakr's instructions, she was then married to Yusuf ibn Tashfin. Before leaving, Abu Bakr appointed Ibn Tashfin as his deputy in charge of the new Almoravid territories in the north. According to Ibn Adhari, Zainab became his most important political advisor. A year later, after suppressing the revolt in the south, Abu Bakr returned north toward Marrakesh, expecting to resume his control of the city and of the Almoravid forces in North Africa. Ibn Tashfin, however, was now unwilling to give up his own position of leadership. While Abu Bakr was still camped near Agmat, Ibn Tashfin sent him lavish gifts, but refused to obey his summons, reportedly on the advice of Zainab. Abu Bakr recognized that he was unable to force the issue and was unwilling to fight a battle over control of Marrakesh, so he decided to voluntarily recognize Ibn Tashfin's leadership in the Maghreb. The two men met on neutral ground between Agmat and Marrakesh to confirm the arrangement. After a short stay in Agmat, Abu Bakr returned south to continue his leadership of the Almoravids in the Sahara. Following this, the Almoravid Empire was divided into two distinct but codependent parts, one led by Ibn Tashfin in the north, and another led by Abu Bakr in the south. Abu Bakr continued to be formally acknowledged as the supreme leader of the Almoravids until his death in 1087. Historical sources give no indication that the two leaders treated each other as enemies, and Ibn Tashfin continued to mint coins in Abu Bakr's name until the latter's death. Following Abu Bakr's departure, Ibn Tashfin was largely responsible for building the Almoravid state in the Maghreb over the next 2 decades. One of Abu Bakr's sons, Ibrahim, who served as the Almoravid leader in Sijil Masa between 1071 and 1076, according to the coinage minted there, did develop a rivalry with Ibn Tashfin and attempted to confront him toward 1076. He marched to Agmat with the intention of reclaiming his father's position in the Maghreb. Another Almoravid commander, Mazdali ibn Tilankan, who was related to both men, diffused the situation and convinced Ibrahim to join his father in the south, rather than start a civil war. Ibn Tashfin had, in the meantime, helped to bring the large area of what is now Morocco, Western Sahara, and Mauritania under Almoravid control. He spent at least several years capturing each fort and settlement in the region around Fez and in northern Morocco. After most of the surrounding region was under his control, he was finally able to conquer Fez definitively. However, there is some contradiction and uncertainty among historical sources regarding the exact chronology of these conquests, with some sources dating the main conquests to the 1060s and others dating them to the 1070s. Some modern authors cite the date of the final conquest of Fez as 1069. Historian Ronald Messier gives the date more specifically as March 18th, 1070. Other historians date this conquest to 1074 or 1075. In 1079, Ibn Tashfin sent an army 20,000 strong from Marrakesh to push towards what is now Tlemcen to attack the Banu Yala, the Zenata tribe occupying the area. Led by Mazdali ibn Tilankan, the army defeated the Banu Yala in battle near the valley of the Mulaya River and executed their commander, Mali ibn Yala, the son of Tlemcen's ruler. However, Ibn Tilankan did not push to Tlemcen right away, as the city of Ujda, occupied by the Bani Isnasan, was too strong to capture. Instead, Ibn Tashfin himself returned with an army in 1081 that captured Ujda and then conquered Tlemcen, massacring the Maghrawa forces there and their leader, Al-Abbas ibn Bakhti al-Maghrawi. He pressed on, and by 1082 he had captured Algiers. Ibn Tashfin subsequently treated Tlemcen as his eastern base. At that time, the city had consisted of an older settlement called Agadir, but Ibn Tashfin founded a new city next to it called Takrat, which later merged with Agadir in the Almohad period to become the present city. The Almoravids subsequently clashed with the Hammadids to the east multiple times, but they did not make a sustained effort to conquer the central Maghrib, and instead focused their efforts on other fronts. Eventually, in 1104, they signed a peace treaty with the Hammadids. Algiers became their easternmost outpost. By the 1080s, local Muslim rulers in Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula, were requesting Ibn Tashfin's help against the encroaching Christian kingdoms to the north. Ibn Tashfin made the capture of Ceuta his primary objective before making any attempt to intervene there. Ceuta, controlled by Zenata forces under the command of Dia al-Dawla Yahya, was the last major city on the African side of the Strait of Gibraltar that still held out against him. In return for a promise to help him, Ibn Tashfin demanded that al-Mu'tamid ibn Abad, the ruler of Seville, provide assistance in besieging the city. Al-Mu'tamid obliged and sent a fleet to blockade the city by sea, while Ibn Tashfin's son Tamim led the siege by land. The city finally surrendered in July 1083, or in August 1084. Ibn Tashfin also made efforts to organize the new Almoravid realm. Under his rule, the Western Maghreb was divided into well-defined administrative provinces for the first time. Prior to this, it had been mostly tribal territory. A developing central government was established in Marrakesh, while he entrusted key provinces to important allies and relatives. The nascent Almoravid state was funded in part by the taxes allowed under Islamic law and by the gold that came from Ghana in the south, but in practice it remained dependent on the spoils of new conquests. The majority of the Almoravid army continued to be composed of Sanhaja recruits, but Ibn Tashfin also began recruiting slaves to form a personal guard. At some point, Yusuf ibn Tashfin moved to acknowledge the Abbasids caliphs in Baghdad as overlords. While the Abbasids themselves had little direct political power by this time, the symbolism of this act was important and enhanced Ibn Tashfin's legitimacy. According to Ibn Idhari, it was at the same time as this that Ibn Tashfin also took the title of Amir al-Muslimin, commander of the Muslims. Ibn Idhari dates this to 1073 or 74, but some authors, including modern historian Évariste Levi Provençal, have dated it into political decision to later, most likely when the Almoravids were in the process of securing control of Al-Andalus. According to Amir Benison, the recognition of the Abbasid Caliph must have been established by the 1090s at latest. When Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi visited Baghdad between 1096 and 1098, possibly as part of an Almoravid embassy to Caliph al-Mustajir, he claimed that the Friday prayers were already being given in the Abbasid Caliph's name across the territories ruled by Yusuf ibn Tashfi. After leaving Yusuf ibn Tashfin in the north and returning south, Abu Bakr ibn Umar reportedly made Azugi his base. The town acted as the capital of the southern Almoravids under him and his successors. Despite the importance of the Saharan trade routes to the Almoravids, the history of the southern wing of the empire is not well documented in Arabic historical sources, and is often neglected in histories of the Maghreb and Al-Andalus. This has also encouraged a division in modern studies about the Almoravids, with archaeology playing a greater role in the study of the southern wing, in the absence of more textual sources. The exact nature and impact of the Almoravid presence in the Sahel is a strongly debated topic among Africanists. According to Arab tradition, the Almoravids under Abu Bakr's leadership conquered the Ghana Empire, founded by the Soninke, sometime around 1076 through 1077. An example of this tradition is the record of historian Ibn Khaldun, who cited Sheikh Uthman, the Faqih of Ghana, writing in 1394. According to this source, the Almoravids weakened Ghana and collected tribute from the Sudan, to the extent that the authority of the rulers of Ghana dwindled away, and they were subjugated and absorbed by the Soso, a neighboring people of the Sudan. Traditions in Mali related that the Soso attacked and took over Mali as well, and the ruler of the Soso, Sumaoro Kante, took over the land. However, criticism from Conrad and Fisher, 1982, argued that the notion of any Almoravid military conquest at its core is merely perpetuated folklore, derived from a misinterpretation or naive reliance on Arabic sources. According to Professor Timothy Insall, the archaeology of ancient Ghana simply does not show the signs of rapid change and destruction that would be associated with any Almoravid-era military conquests. Dierke Lang agreed with the original military incursion theory, but argues that this doesn't preclude Almoravid political agitation, claiming that the main factor of the demise of the Ghana Empire owed much to the latter. According to Lang, Almoravid religious influence was gradual, rather than the result of military action. There the Almoravids gained power by marrying among the nation's nobility. Lang attributes the decline of ancient Ghana to numerous unrelated factors, one of which is likely attributable to internal dynastic struggles instigated by Almoravid influence and Islamic pressures, but devoid of military conquest. This interpretation of events has been disputed by later scholars like Cheryl L. Burkhalter, who argued that, whatever the nature of the conquest in the south of the Sahara, the influence and success of the Almoravid movement in securing West African gold and circulating it widely necessitated a high degree of political control. The Arab geographer Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri wrote that the Almoravids ended Ibadi Islam in Tadmekka in 1084, and that Abu Bakr arrived at the Mountain of Gold in the Deep South. Abu Bakr finally died in Tagant in November 1087, following an injury in battle, according to oral tradition, from an arrow while fighting in the historic region of the Sudan. After the death of Abu Bakr in 1087, the confederation of Berber tribes in the Sahara was divided between the descendants of Abu Bakr and his brother Yahya, and would have lost control of Ghana. Cheryl Burkhalter suggests that Abu Bakr's son Yahya was the leader of the Almoravid expedition that conquered Ghana in 1076, and that the Almoravids would have survived the loss of Ghana and the defeat in the Maghreb by the Almohads, and would have ruled the Sahara until the end of the 12th century. Initially, it appears Ibn Tashfin had little interest in involving the Almoravids in the politics of Al-Andalus, the Muslim territories on the Iberian Peninsula. After the collapse of the Caliphate of Córdoba in the early 11th century, Al-Andalus had split into small kingdoms or city-states known as the taifas. These states constantly fought with each other, but were unable to raise large armies of their own, so they became reliant instead on the Christian kingdoms of the north for military support. This support was secured through the regular payment of parias, tributes, to the Christian kings. But the payments became a fiscal burden that drained the treasuries of these local rulers. In turn, the Taifa rulers burdened their subjects with increased taxation, including taxes and tariffs that were not considered legal under Islamic law. As the payments of tribute began to falter, the Christian kingdoms resorted to punitive raids and eventually to conquest. The Taifa kings were unwilling or unable to unite to counter this threat, and even the most powerful Taifa kingdom, Seville, was unable to resist Christian advances. After the Almoravid capture of Ceuta, 1083, on the southern shore of the Strait of Gibraltar, the way was now open for Ibn Tashfin to intervene in Al-Andalus. It was in this same year that Alfonso VI, King of Castile and Leon, led a military campaign into southern Al-Andalus to punish Al-Mutamid of Seville for failing to pay him tribute. His expedition penetrated all the way to Tarifa, the southernmost point of the Iberian Peninsula. A couple of years later, in May 1085, he seized control of Toledo, previously one of the most powerful city-states in Al-Andalus. Soon after, he also began a siege of Zaragoza. These dramatic events forced the Taifa kings to finally consider seeking an external intervention by the Almoravids. According to the most detailed Arabic source, it was Al-Mutamid, the ruler of Seville, who convened a meeting with his neighbors, Al-Mutawakkil of Badajoz and Abdallah ibn Bulugin of Granada, where they agreed to send an embassy to Ibn Tashfin to appeal for his assistance. The Taifa kings were aware of the risks that came with an Almoravid intervention, but considered it the best choice among their bad options. Al-Mutamid is said to have remarked bitterly, "Better to pasture camels than to be a swineherd," meaning that it was better to submit to another Muslim ruler than to end up as subjects of a Christian king. As a condition for his assistance, Ibn Tashfin demanded that Algeciras, a city on the northern shore of the Strait of Gibraltar, across from Ceuta, be surrendered to him so he could use it as a base for his troops. Al-Mutamid agreed. Ibn Tashfin, wary of the hesitation of the Taifa kings, immediately sent an advance force of 500 troops across the strait to take control of Algeciras. They did so in July 1086 without encountering resistance. The rest of the Almoravid army, numbering around 12,000, soon followed. Ibn Tashfin and his army then marched to Seville, where they met up with the forces of Al-Mutamid, Al-Mutawakkil, and Abdallah ibn Bulugin. Alfonso VI, hearing of this development, lifted his siege of Zaragoza and marched south to confront them. The two sides met at a place north of Badajoz, called Zalaka in Arabic sources and Sagrayas in Christian sources. In the Battle of Sagrayas, or Battle of Zalaka, on the 23rd of October 1086, Alfonso was soundly defeated and forced to retreat north in disorder. Al-Mutamid recommended that they press their advantage, but Ibn Tashfin did not pursue the Christian army further, returning instead to Seville and then to North Africa. It is possible he was unwilling to be away from his home base for too long, or that the death of his eldest son, Sir, encouraged him to return. After Ibn Tashfin's departure, Alfonso VI quickly resumed his pressure on the Taifa kings and forced them to send tribute payments again. He captured the fortress of Aledo, cutting off eastern Al-Andalus from the other Muslim kingdoms. Meanwhile, Ibn Rashid, the ruler of Murcia, was embroiled in a rivalry with Al-Mutamid of Seville. As a result, this time it was the elites or notables, Wuju of Al-Andalus, who now called for help from the Almoravids, rather than the kings. In May-June 1088, Ibn Tashfin landed at Algeciras with another army, soon joined by Al-Mutamid of Seville, by Abdallah ibn Bulugin of Granada, and by other troops sent by Ibn Sumadi of Almeria and Ibn Rashid of Murcia. They then set out to retake Aledo. The siege, however, was undermined by rivalries and disunity among the Taifa kings. News eventually reached the Muslims that Alfonso VI was bringing an army to help the Castilian garrison. In November 1088, Ibn Tashfin lifted the siege and returned to North Africa again, having achieved nothing. 21. Alfonso VI sent his trusted commander, Alvar Fanez, to pressure the Taifa kings again. He succeeded in forcing Abdullah ibn Bulugan to resume tribute payments and began to pressure al-Mutamid in turn. In 1090, Ibn Tashfin returned to Al-Andalus yet again, but by this point he seemed to have given up on the Taifa kings and now intended to take direct control of the region. The Almoravid cause benefited from the support of the Maliki Fuqaha, Islamic jurists, in Al-Andalus, who extolled the Almoravid devotion to jihad while criticizing the Taifa kings as impious, self-indulgent, and thus illegitimate. In September 1090, Ibn Tashfin forced Granada to surrender to him and sent Abdallah ibn Bulugan into exile in Egmat. He then returned to North Africa again, but this time he left his nephew, Sir Ibn Abu Bakr, in charge of Almoravid forces in Al-Andalus. Al-Mutamid, seeking to salvage his position, resorted to striking an alliance with Alfonso VI, which further undermined his own popular support. In early 1091, the Almoravids took control of Córdoba and turned towards Seville, defeating a Castilian force led Alvar Fanez that came to help Al-Mutamid. In September 1091, Al-Mutamid surrendered Seville to the Almoravids and was exiled to Agmat. In late 1091, the Almoravids captured Almeria. In late 1091 or January 1092, Ibn Aisha, one of Ibn Tashfin's sons, seized control of Murcia. The capture of Murcia brought the Almoravids within reach of Valencia, which was officially under the control of Al-Qadir, the former Taifa ruler of Toledo. He had been installed here in 1086 by the Castilians after they took control of Toledo. Al-Qadir's unpopular rule in Valencia was supported by a Castilian garrison headed by Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, a Castilian noble and mercenary better known today as El Cid. In October 1092, when El Cid was away from the city, there was an insurrection and coup d'état led by the judge Abu Ahmad Jafar ibn Jahaf. The latter called for help from the Almoravids in Murcia, who sent a small group of warriors to the city. The Castilian garrison was forced to leave, and Al-Qadir was captured and executed. However, the Almoravids did not send enough forces to oppose El Cid's return, and Ibn Jahaf undermined his popular support by proceeding to install himself as ruler, acting like yet another Taifa king. El Cid began a long siege of the city, completely surrounding it, burning nearby villages, and confiscating the crops of the surrounding countryside. Ibn Jahaf agreed at one point to pay tribute to El Cid in order to end the siege, which resulted in the Almoravids in the city being escorted out by El Cid's men. For reasons that remain unclear, an Almoravid relief army, led by Ibn Tashfin's nephew, Abu Bakr ibn Ibrahim, approached Valencia in September 1093, but then retreated without engaging El Cid. Ibn Jahaf continued negotiations. In the end, he refused to pay El Cid's tribute, and the siege continued. By April 1094, the city was starving, and he decided to surrender it shortly after. El Cid re-entered Valencia on the 15th of June 1094, after 20 months of siege. Rather than ruling through a puppet again, he now took direct control as king. Meanwhile, also in 1094, the Almoravids seized control of the entire Taifa kingdom of Badajoz, after its ruler, Al-Mutawakkil, sought his own alliance with Castile. The Almoravid expedition was led by Sir Ibn Abu Bakr, who had been appointed as governor of Seville. The Almoravids then returned their attention to Valencia, where another of Ibn Tashfin's nephews, Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, was ordered to take the city. He arrived outside its walls in October 1094 and began attacks on the city. The siege ended when El Cid launched a two-sided attack. He sent a sortie from one city gate that posed as his main force, occupying the Almoravid troops, while he personally led another force from a different city gate and attacked their undefended camp. This inflicted the first major defeat on the Almoravids on the Iberian Peninsula. After his victory, El Cid executed Ibn Jahaf by burning him alive in public, perhaps in retaliation for treachery. El Cid fortified his new kingdom by building fortresses along the southern approaches to the city to defend against future Almoravid attacks. In late 1096, Ibn Aisha led an army of 30,000 men to besiege the strongest of these fortresses, Peña Cadiella, just south of Zativa. El Cid confronted them and called on Aragon for reinforcements. When the reinforcements approached, the Almoravids lifted the siege, but laid a trap for El Cid's forces as they marched back to Valencia. They successfully ambushed the Christians in a narrow pass located between the mountains and the sea, but El Cid managed to rally his troops and repel the Almoravids yet again. In 1097, the Almoravid governor of Zativa, Ali ibn al-Hajj, led another incursion into Valencian territory, but was quickly defeated and pursued to Almenara, which El Cid then captured after a 3-month siege. In 1097, Yusuf ibn Tashfin himself led another army into Al-Andalus. Setting out from Cordoba, with Muhammad ibn al-Hajj as his field commander, he marched against Alfonso VI, who was in Toledo at the time. The Castilians were routed at the Battle of Consuegra. El Cid was not involved, but his son, Diego, was killed in the battle. Soon after, Alva Farnese was also defeated near Cuenca in another battle with the Almoravids, led by Ibn Aisha. The latter followed up this victory by ravaging the lands around Valencia and defeated another army sent by El Cid. Despite these victories in the field, the Almoravids did not capture any major new towns or fortresses. El Cid attempted to Christianize Valencia, converting its main mosque into a church and establishing a bishopric, but ultimately failed to attract many new Christian settlers to the city. He died on the 10th of July 1099, leaving his wife Jimena in charge of the kingdom. She was unable to hold off Almoravid pressures, which culminated in a siege of the city by the veteran Almoravid commander Mazdali in the early spring of 1102. In May, Jimena and the Christians who wished to leave the city were evacuated with the help of Alfonso VI. The Almoravids occupied the city after them. That same year, with the capture of Valencia counting as another triumph, Yusuf ibn Tashfin celebrated and arranged for his son, Ali ibn Yusuf, to be publicly recognized as his heir. The Taifa king of Zaragoza, the only other Muslim power left in the peninsula, sent an ambassador on this occasion and signed a treaty with the Almoravids. By the time Ibn Tashfin died in 1106, the Almoravids were thus in control of all of Al-Andalus, except for Zaragoza. In general, they had not reconquered any of the lands lost to the Christian kingdoms in the previous century. You're watching the Everything Network. Boleslaus was the son of Duke Vratislaus I of Bohemia by his marriage with Drahomara, probably a Hevelian princess. His father took over the rule in Prague around the time of Boleslav's birth, during which he had to deal with both the exertion of influence by the East Frankish dukes of Bavaria and Saxony and the Magyar incursions. Boleslaus and his elder brother Wenceslaus were taught the Christian faith and to read the Psalms by their grandmother Ludmila. There is evidence that Boleslaus's pagan mother might have influenced him against his brother and Christianity, though he later repented. In no way did he impede the growth of Christianity during his reign in Bohemia, and, in fact, he actually sent his daughter Mlada, a nun, to Pope John XIII in Rome to ask permission to make Prague a bishopric. Upon his death, Vratislaus was succeeded by his eldest son, Wenceslaus. While the external situation worsened with the alliance between Duke Arnulf of Bavaria and the Saxon Duke Henry the Fowler, King of East Francia from 919, Wenceslaus could only maintain his independence by entering an agreement to pay an annual tribute to the East Frankish, German ruler. Shortly afterwards, in 935, or in 929, according to other sources, Wenceslaus was murdered at Stara Boleslav after accepting an invitation from Boleslaus to celebrate the feast of Saints Cosmas and Damian with him there. According to tradition, a son of Boleslaus was born at exactly the same time. The child was given the strange name Strakkvas, which means a dreadful feast. Remorseful for what he had done, Boleslaus promised to have his son educated as a clergyman and devote his life to religion. After having taken over the Prague throne, one of Boleslaus's major concerns was the tribute paid yearly to the East Frankish kings, as stipulated in the peace treaty that Henry the Fowler had established with Boleslaus's brother Wenceslaus. He stopped the payment shortly after he ascended the throne, which led to a prolonged war with Henry's successor, King Otto. In 935, Boleslaus attacked the Thuringian allies of the Saxons in the northwest and defeated two of Otto's armies, from Thuringia and Merseburg. The war then deteriorated to border raids, the general pattern of warfare in this region at the time, and reached its conclusion in 950 when King Otto besieged a castle owned by Boleslaus's son. This prompted Boleslaus to sign a peace treaty with Otto. Although he remained undefeated, he promised to resume the payment of tribute. 5 years later, the armies of the Czechs and Germans allied against the Magyars in the victorious Battle of Lechfeld on the 10th of August 955. After the battle, the remainder of the huge Magyar army turned to Bohemia, where it was crushed by Boleslaus. Shortly afterwards, in October, he also helped Otto to crush an uprising of Slavic tribes led by the Obertreit princes, Nakon and Stoignev, on the lower Elbe River in the battle on the Rax. The defeat of invading Hungarians brought the same benefits to both Germans and Czechs. Less obvious is what Boleslaus expected to gain from his participation in Otto's war against the Obertreit princes in the far north. He probably wanted to ensure that his powerful German neighbours did not interfere with him in expanding the Bohemian territories to the east. As a result of the victory, Boleslaus freed the Moravian lands from Magyar raids and expanded his territory, which in turn was later conquered by Polish dukes and became known as Upper Silesia and Lesser Poland. By occupying the city of Krakow, he controlled important trade routes from Prague to Kiev and Lviv. To defuse the Bohemian-Polish conflict, Duke Boleslav married his daughter Dobravka to the pagan Piast prince Mieszko I in 963–964 and helped bring Christianity to Poland. He even allied with Mieszko in the campaign against the Saxon Count Wichman the Younger. According to the medieval chronicler Cosmas of Prague, Duke Boleslaus died on the 15th of July 967, a date questioned by recent research. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Boleslaus the Pious. Boleslaus II took over the rule of the Duchy of Bohemia as Duke or Prince on his father's death in 972. Like his father, he initially quarrelled with the Teutonic kings of Germany. In 974, he and Duke Mieszko I of Poland supported the rebellious Duke Henry II of Bavaria in his civil war against the rule of Emperor Otto II. In 976, Henry was defeated and fled to Boleslaus's court at Prague Castle, after which Otto's forces campaigned in the Bohemian lands. Finally, in 978, Boleslaus solemnly pledged allegiance to the emperor at the Easter festivities in Quedlinburg. In turn, relations with Poland deteriorated from about 980 onwards. When Emperor Otto II died in 983 and was succeeded by his minor son Otto III, the Bohemian alliance with Poland was discarded, as Boleslaus again allied with the insurgent Bavarian Duke Henry, while Mieszko I took the side of the young king. Moreover, when Boleslaus occupied the Saxon Margravate of Meissen, he thwarted the plans of Mieszko's son Bolesław, who had married a daughter of Margrave Richtag. In 987, Boleslaus had to retire from Meissen, and from about 990 he sparked a long-lasting conflict with Poland around the lands of Silesia and Lesser Poland, the Polish-Bohemian War. In 992, he approached King Otto III and participated in an unsuccessful campaign against the Lutusi tribes in the wake of the Great Slav Rising of 983. Boleslaus's reign is most notable for the foundation of the Diocese of Prague in 973, which earned him the epithet the Pious by the medieval chronicler Cosmas of Prague. Nevertheless, the Bohemian Diocese was placed at that time within the jurisdiction of the Archbishop of Mainz, and Emperor Otto II enforced the appointment of the Saxon monk Detmar as first bishop. Meanwhile, the struggle with the rival Slavnik dynasty flared up again from 981 onwards, when Prince Soboslav of the Slavnik dynasty began to forge alliances with the Polish and Saxons. Upon Bishop Detmar's death in 982, Soboslav's brother Adalbert, later known as Saint Adalbert of Prague, was appointed his successor until he abandoned his primacy to lead a mission to the Old Prussians in 994. On the 28th of September 995, Boleslaus' forces and the Confederate Wrschowcy clan stormed Libis Castle in southern Bohemia and massacred the members of the Slavnik dynasty that were found there. Boleslaus's brutal triumph ensured the unity of Bohemia under a single ruler. His first wife, Adeva, may have been a daughter of the English king Edward the Elder, the daughter known to English historians as Elfgifu, who married a prince near the Alps, though the evidence for this is weak. His second wife was Emma of Mielnik. It is certain that Boleslaus's oldest son was born by Adeva, but the mother of the others cannot be established with certainty. Boleslaus III, his eldest son, was his successor, with Jaromir becoming Duke of Bohemia in 1003, and Oldřich became Duke of Bohemia in 1012. Soon after his father's death, Boleslaus III entered into conflict with his brothers and was deposed in 1002. The internal struggles of the dynasty shook the Bohemian Duchy until Duke Oldřich's efforts stabilized the country. Oldřich was the fourth son of Duke Boleslaus II of Bohemia. Like all his father's children, his mother was Adeva. Upon the death of his father, his eldest brother Boleslaus III succeeded as duke. However, he soon entered into a fierce conflict with his younger brothers Oldřich and Jaromir. In 1001, both had to flee to the Bavarian court at Regensburg. When Boleslaus III was deposed by the rival Wrschowcy dynasty the next year, and the Polish ruler Bolesław I the Brave invaded Bohemia, King Henry II of Germany intervened. As a part of Henry's expedition to Prague, Boleslaus's brothers were able to return to Bohemia, and Jaromir was installed as Bohemian Duke in 1004. In the German-Polish War of 1002 through 1018, Duke Jaromir remained a loyal supporter of the German king. Nevertheless, Henry did not take action when he was deposed and blinded by his brother Oldřich on April 12, 1012. While Jaromir fled to Poland, Oldřich recognized the sovereignty of the German king. He secured his rule by suppressing the Wrschowcy insurgents. Oldřich and his son Bretislaus sought to win back Moravia, once conquered from the Poles by Oldřich's grandfather, Duke Boleslaus I. Bretislaus and his wife Judith of Schweinfurt took up residence in Olomouc. In 1029, the Bohemian forces, backed by Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II, finally drove the Poles out of the eastern lands. However, Bretislaus's efforts to occupy adjacent territories in what is today Slovakia by marching against the forces of the Kingdom of Hungary failed in 1030 due to the jealousy of the emperor, who reached an agreement with King Stephen. In the following year, Bohemian forces refused to take the field for the emperor. In 1032, Duke Oldřich was invited to the Hoftag Diet at Mersburg, but did not appear. His absence raised the ire of the emperor, and Conrad, busy with events in Burgundy, charged his son Henry III with punishing the recalcitrant Bohemian. Oldřich was arrested, deposed, and sent to Bavaria. He was again replaced by his brother Jaromir. However, when Oldřich was pardoned the next year, he returned to Bohemia and had Jaromir captured and deposed. He seized power again and drove out Jaromir's son from Moravia. Oldřich died abruptly on November 9, 1034, and later examination of his skeleton revealed his skull to have suffered a fatal blow. Jaromir then renounced the throne in favor of his nephew Bretislaus. Bretislav was the son of Duke Oldřich and his low-born concubine Božena. As an illegitimate son who could not obtain a desirable wife by conventional means, he chose to kidnap Judith of Schweinfurt, a daughter of the Bavarian noble Henry of Schweinfurt, Margrave of Nordgau, in 1019 at Schweinfurt, and marry her. During his father's reign, in 1019 or 1029, Bretislav took back Moravia from Poland. About 1031, he invaded Hungary in order to prevent its expansion under King Stephen. The partition of Bohemia between Oldřich and his brother Jaromir in 1034 was probably the reason why Bretislav fled beyond the Bohemian border, only to come back to take the throne after Jaromir's abdication. In 1035, Bretislav helped Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II in his war against the Lusatians. In 1039, he invaded Lesser and Greater Poland, captured Poznań, sacked Gniezno, and brought the relics of Saint Adalbert, Radim Gaudentius, and the five brothers back with him. On the way back, he regained part of Silesia, including Wrocław. His main goal was to set up an archbishopric in Prague and create a large state subject only to the Holy Roman Empire. His raid had an unintended enduring influence on Polish history, as the plundering and destruction of Gniezno forced the next Polish rulers to move their capital to Krakow, which would retain this role for many centuries ahead. In 1040, the German king Henry III invaded Bohemia, but was forced to retreat after he lost the battle at Brudek, a pass in the Bohemian forest. The following year, Henry III invaded again, skirted the border defences and laid siege to Bretislav in Prague. Forced by a mutiny among his nobles and betrayed by Bishop Szczebisz of Prague, Bretislav had to renounce all of his conquests, save for Moravia, and recognise Henry III as his sovereign. In 1042, Emperor Henry III granted Bretislav Silesia as a lien. In 1047, Emperor Henry III negotiated a peace treaty between Bretislav and the Poles. This pact worked in Bretislav's favour, as the Polish ruler swore never again to attack Bohemia in return for an annual subsidy to Gniezno. Bretislav was the author of decrees concerning the rules of Christianization, which included a ban on polygamy and trade on holidays. It was in 1030 that Bretislav married Judith of Schweinfurt. In 1054, he established rules for the ducal succession and introduced agnatic seniority as the law of succession. Younger members of the dynasty were supposed to govern fiefs, technically parts of Moravia, but only at the duke's discretion. The result of this succession policy was the relative indivisibility of the Czech lands, but also bitter conflicts over succession and territorial primacy between members of the dynasty. It was effectively ended by the elevation of Bohemia to the status of a kingdom under Ottokar, the first of Bohemia, which led to the establishment of primogeniture as the ruling principle for succession rights. Bretislav's eldest son, Spetinev, was to succeed him as Duke of Bohemia with control over its domains. Moravia was incorporated into the Bohemian Duchy, but divided among 3 of his younger sons. The Olomouc appanage went to Vratislaus, the Znojmo appanage went to Conrad Firth, and the Brno appanage went to Otto I. The youngest son, Jaromir, entered the church and became Bishop of Prague. Bretislav died at Krudim in 1055 during preparations for another invasion of Hungary and was succeeded by his son Spetinev II as Duke of Bohemia. His sons Otto and Vratislav were shut out of the government by Spetinev, but after his death gained control of Moravia and Bohemia, respectively. The Crusader States, or Outremer, were 4 Catholic polities that existed in the Levant from 1098 to 1291. Following the principles of feudalism, the foundation for these polities was laid by the First Crusade, which was proclaimed by the Latin Church in 1095 in order to reclaim the Holy Land after it was lost to the 7th century Muslim conquest. Situated on the eastern Mediterranean, the 4 states were, in order from north to south, the County of Edessa, 1098-1150, the Principality of Antioch, 1098-1268, the County of Tripoli, 1102-1289, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, 1099-1291. The 3 northern states covered an area in what is now southeastern Turkey, northwestern Syria, and northern Lebanon, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the southernmost and most prominent state, covered an area in what is now Israel, the state of Palestine, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, southern Lebanon, and western Jordan. The description, Crusader States, can be misleading, as from 1130 onwards, very few people among the Franks were crusaders. Medieval and modern writers use the term Outremer as a synonym, derived from the French word for overseas. By 1098, the Crusaders' armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem was passing through the Syria region. Edessa, under the rule of Greek Orthodoxy, was subject to a coup d'état in which the leadership was taken over by Baldwin of Boulogne, and Bohemond of Taranto remained as the ruling prince in the captured city of Antioch. The siege of Jerusalem in 1099 resulted in a decisive Crusader victory over the Fatimid Caliphate, after which territorial consolidation followed, including the taking of Tripoli. In 1144, Edessa fell to the Zengid Turks, but the other 3 realms endured until the final years of the 13th century, when they fell to the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The Mamluks captured Antioch in 1268 and Tripoli in 1289, leaving only the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had been severely weakened by the Ayyubid Sultanate after the siege of Jerusalem in 1244. The Crusader presence in the Levant collapsed shortly thereafter, when the Mamluks captured Acre in 1291, ending the Kingdom of Jerusalem nearly 200 years after it was founded. With all 4 of the states defeated and annexed, the survivors fled to the Kingdom of Cyprus, which had been established by the Third Crusade. The study of the Crusader states in their own right, as opposed to being a subtopic of the Crusades, began in 19th century France as an analogy to the French colonial experience in the Levant, though this was rejected by 20th century historians. Their consensus was that the Frankish population, as the Western Europeans were known at the time, lived as a minority society that was largely urban and isolated from the indigenous Levantine peoples, having separate legal and religious systems. The ancient Jewish communities that had survived and remained in the holy cities of Jerusalem, Tiberias, Hebron, and Safed since the Jewish-Roman wars and the destruction of the Second Temple were heavily persecuted in a pattern of rampant Christian anti-Semitism, accompanying the Crusades. The terms Crusader States describe the four feudal states established after the First Crusade around 1100, from north to south: the county of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the county of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The term Outremer is of medieval origin, whilst modern historians use Crusader states and the term Franks for the European incomers. However, relatively few of the incoming Europeans took a Crusader oath. The Franks were mainly French-speaking Roman Catholics, while the natives were mostly Arabic or Greek-speaking Muslims, Christians of other denominations, and Jews. The Kingdom of Jerusalem extended over historical Palestine and at its greatest extent included some territory east of the Jordan River. The northern states covered what is now part of Syria, southeastern Turkey, and Lebanon. These areas were historically called Syria and Upper Mesopotamia. Edessa extended east beyond the Euphrates. In the Middle Ages, the Crusader states were also called Syria, or Syri. From around 1115, the ruler of Jerusalem was styled King of the Latins in Jerusalem. Historian Hans Eberhard Meyer believes this reflected that only Latins held complete political and legal rights in the kingdom, and that the major division in the society was not between the nobility and the common people, but between the Franks and the indigenous peoples. Despite sometimes receiving homage from, and acting as regent for, the rulers of the other states, the king held no formalized overlord status, and those states remained legally outside the kingdom. Jews, Christians, and Muslims respected Palestine, known as the Holy Land, as an exceptionally sacred place. They all associated the region with the lives of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. All of the holy sites in Judaism were found there, including the remains of the Second Temple, destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. The New Testament presented Palestine as the venue of the Acts of Jesus and his apostles. Islamic tradition described the region's principal city, Jerusalem, as the site of the Isra and Miraj, Muhammad's miraculous night travel and ascension to heaven. Places associated with holy people developed into shrines visited by pilgrims coming from faraway lands, often as an act of penance. The surge in Christian pilgrimage also inspired many Jews to return to the Holy Land. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built to commemorate Christ's crucifixion and resurrection in Jerusalem. The Church of the Nativity was thought to enclose his birthplace in Bethlehem. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque commemorated Muhammad's night journey. Although the most sacred places of devotion were in Palestine, there were also shrines in neighboring Syria. As a borderland of the Muslim world, Syria was an important theatre of jihad, though enthusiasm for pursuing it had faded by the end of the 11th century. In contrast, the Catholic ideology of religious war quickly developed, culminating in the idea of crusades for lands claimed for Christianity. Most crusades came from what had been the Carolingian Empire around 800. The empire had disintegrated, and two loosely unified successor states had taken its place: the Holy Roman Empire, which encompassed Germany, part of northern Italy, and the neighbouring lands, and France. Germany was divided into duchies, such as Lower Lorraine and Saxony, and their dukes did not always obey the emperors. Northern Italy was even less united, divided into numerous de facto independent states, and the authority of the emperor was barely felt. Carolingian's western successor state, France, wasn't united either. The French kings only controlled a small central region directly. Counts and dukes ruled other regions, and some of them were remarkably wealthy and powerful. In particular, the dukes of Aquitaine and Normandy, and the counts of Anjou, Champagne, Flanders, and Toulouse. Western Christians and Muslims interacted mainly through warring or commerce. During the 8th and 9th centuries, the Muslims were on the offensive, and commercial contacts primarily enriched the Islamic world. Europe was rural and underdeveloped, offering little more than raw materials and slaves in return for spices, cloth, and other luxuries from the Middle East. Climate change during the medieval warm period affected the Middle East and Western Europe differently. In the East, it caused droughts, while in the West, it improved conditions for agriculture. Higher agricultural yields led to population growth and the expansion of commerce, and to the development of prosperous new military and mercantile elites. In Catholic Europe, state and society were organized along feudal lines. Landed estates were customarily granted in fief, that is, in return for services that the grantee or vassal was to perform for the grantor, or lord. A vassal owed fealty to the lord and was expected to provide military aid and advice to him. Violence was endemic, and a new class of mounted warriors, the knights, emerged. Many built castles, and their feuds brought much suffering to the unarmed population. The development of the knightly class coincided with the subjection of the formerly free peasantry into serfdom, but the connection between the two processes is unclear. As feudal lordships could be established by the acquiring land, Western aristocrats willingly launched offensive military campaigns, even against faraway territories. Catholic Europe's expansion in the Mediterranean began in the second half of the 11th century. Norman warlords conquered southern Italy from the Byzantines and ousted the Muslim rulers from Sicily. French aristocrats hastened to the Iberian Peninsula to fight the Moors of Al-Andalus, and Italian fleets launched pillaging raids against the North African ports. This shift of power especially benefited merchants from the Italian city-states of Amalfi, Genoa, Pisa, and Venice. They replaced the Muslim and Jewish middlemen in the lucrative trans-Mediterranean commerce, and their fleets became the dominant naval forces in the region. On the eve of the Crusades, after 1,000 years of reputedly uninterrupted succession of popes, the papacy was Catholic Europe's oldest institution. The popes were seen as the Apostle St. Peter's successors, and their prestige was high. In the West, the Gregorian reform reduced lay influence on church life and strengthened papal authority over the clergy. Eastern Christians continued to consider the popes as no more than one of the 5 highest-ranking church leaders, titled patriarchs, and rejected the idea of papal supremacy. This opposition, together with differences in theology and liturgy, caused acrimonious disputes, which escalated when a papal legate excommunicated the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople in 1054. The patriarchs of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem sided with the ecumenical patriarch against the papacy, but the East-West schism was not yet inevitable, and the Catholic and Orthodox churches remained in full communion. The Gregorian reform enhanced the Pope's influence on secular matters. To achieve political goals, popes excommunicated their opponents, placed entire realms under interdict, and promised spiritual rewards to those who took up arms for their cause. In 1074, Pope Gregory VII even considered leading a military campaign against the Turks, who had attacked Byzantine territories in Anatolia. Turkic migration permeated the Middle East from the 9th century. Muslim border raiders captured unconverted Turkic nomads in the Central Asian borderlands and sold them to Islamic leaders who used them as slave soldiers. These were known as Ghilman or Mamluk and were emancipated when converted to Islam. Mamluks were valued primarily because the link of their prospects to a single master generated extreme loyalty. In the context of Middle Eastern politics, this made them more trustworthy than relatives. Eventually, some Mamluk descendants climbed the Muslim hierarchy to become kingmakers or even dynastic founders. In the mid-11th century, a minor clan of Oghuz Turks named Seljuks, after the warlord Saljuk from Transoxiana, had expanded through Khorasan, Iran, and on to Baghdad. There, Saljuk's grandson Tugril was granted the title Sultan, power in Arabic, by the Abbasid Caliph. The caliphs kept their legitimacy and prestige, but the sultans held political power. Seljuk's success was achieved by extreme violence. It brought disruptive nomadism to the sedentary society of the Levant, and set a pattern followed by other nomadic Turkic clans, such as the Danish Mendids and the Artukids. The Great Seljuk Empire was decentralized, polyglot, and multinational. A junior Seljuk ruling a province as an appanage was titled Malik, Arabic for kin. Mamluk military commanders acting as tutors and guardians for young Seljuk princes held the position of Atabeg, father commander. If his ward held a province in appanage, the Atabeg ruled it as regent for the underage Malik. On occasion, the Atabeg kept power after his ward reached the age of majority or died. The Seljuks adopted and strengthened the traditional ikta system of the administration of state revenues. This system secured the payment of military commanders through granting them the right to collect the land tax in a well-defined territory, but it exposed the taxpayers to an absent lord's greed and to his officials' arbitrary actions. Although the Seljuk state worked when family ties and personal loyalty overlapped the leader's personal ambitions, the lavish ikta grants combined with rivalries between Maliks, Atabegs, and military commanders could lead to disintegration in critical moments. The region's ethnic and religious diversity led to alienation among the ruled populations. In Syria, the Seljuk Sunnis ruled indigenous Shias. In Cilicia and northern Syria, the Byzantines, Arabs, and Turks squeezed populations of Armenians. The Seljuks contested control of southern Palestine with Egypt, where Shia rulers ruled a majority Sunni populace through powerful viziers who were mainly Turkic or Armenian, rather than Egyptian or Arab. The Seljuks and the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt hated each other, as the Seljuks saw themselves as defenders of the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate, and Fatimid Egypt was the chief Shiite power in Islam. The root of this was beyond cultural and racial conflict, but originated in the splits within Islam following Muhammad's death. Sunnis supported a caliphal succession that began with one of his associates, Abu Bakr, while Shiites supported an alternative succession from his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. Islamic law granted the status of dhimmi, or protected peoples, to the people of the book, like Christians and Jews. The dhimmi were second-class citizens, obliged to pay a special poll tax, the jizya, but they could practice their religion and maintain their own law courts. Theological, liturgical, and cultural differences had given rise to the development of competing Christian denominations in the Levant before the 7th century Muslim conquest. The Greek Orthodox natives, or Melkites, remained in full communion with the Byzantine Imperial Church, and their religious leaders often came from the Byzantine capital, Constantinople. In the 5th century, the Nestorians and the Monophysite Jacobites, Armenians and Copts, broke with the Byzantine state church. The Maronites' separate church organization emerged under Muslim rule. During the late 10th and early 11th centuries, the Byzantine Empire had been on the offensive, recapturing Antioch in 969, after 3 centuries of Arab rule, and invading Syria. Turkic brigands and their Byzantine, also often ethnically Turkic counterparts called Akritai, indulged in cross-border raiding. In 1071, while securing his northern borders during a break in his campaigns against the Fatimid Caliphate, Sultan Alp Arslan defeated Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes at Manzikert. Romanos's capture and Byzantine factionalism that followed broke Byzantine border control. This enabled large numbers of Turkic warbands and nomadic herders to enter Anatolia. Alp Arslan's cousin Suleiman ibn Qutulmish seized Cilicia and entered Antioch in 1084. 2 years later, he was killed in a conflict with the Great Seljuk Empire. Between 1092 and 1094, Nizam al-Mulk, the Sultan Malik Shah, the Fatimid Caliph, al-Mustansir Billah and the Vizier Badr al-Jamali all died. Malik Shah's brother Tutush and the Atabegs of Aleppo and Edessa were killed in the succession conflict, and Suleiman's son Kilij Arslan revived his father's Sultanate of Rum in Anatolia. The Egyptian succession resulted in a split in the Ismailist branch of Shia Islam. The Persian missionary Hassani Sabah led a breakaway group, creating the Nizari branch of Ismailism. This was known as the New Preaching in Syria and the Order of Assassins in Western historiography. The order used targeted murder to compensate for their lack of military power. The Seljuk invasions, the subsequent eclipse of the Byzantines and Fatimids, and the disintegration of the Seljuk Empire revived the old Levantine system of city-states. The region had always been highly urbanized, and the local societies were organized into networks of interdependent settlements, each centered around a city or a major town. These networks developed into autonomous lordships under the rule of a Turkic, Arab or Armenian warlord or town magistrate in the late 11th century. The local Quadists took control of Tyre and Tripoli, the Arab Banu Munkid seized Shaizar, and Tutush's sons Dukak and Ridwan succeeded in Damascus and Aleppo respectively, but their Atabegs, Jana ad-Dawla and Toktakin, were in control. Ridwan's retainer Sokman ben Artuk held Jerusalem, Ridwan's father-in-law, Yaasian, ruled Antioch, and a warlord representing Byzantine interests called Thoros seized Edessa. During this period, the old Islamic conflict between Sunni and Shia made the Muslim peoples more likely to wage war on each other than on Christians. The Byzantines augmented their armies with mercenaries from the Turks and Europe. This compensated for a shortfall caused by lost territory, especially in Anatolia. In 1095, at the Council of Piacenza, Emperor Alexios Komnenos requested support from Pope Urban VI against the Seljuk threat. What the emperor probably had in mind was a relatively modest force, and Urban far exceeded his expectations by calling for the First Crusade at the later Council of Clermont. He developed a doctrine of bellum sacrum, Christian holy war, and, based mainly on Old Testament passages in which God leads the Hebrews to victory in war, reconciled this with church teachings. Urban's call for an armed pilgrimage for the liberation of the Eastern Christians and the recovery of the Holy Land aroused unprecedented enthusiasm in Catholic Europe. Within a year, tens of thousands of people, both commoners and aristocrats, departed for the military campaign. Individual crusaders' motivations to join the crusade varied, but some of them probably left Europe to make a new permanent home in the Levant. Alexios cautiously welcomed the feudal armies commanded by Western nobles. By dazzling them with wealth and charming them with flattery, Alexios extracted oaths of fealty from most of the Crusader commanders. As his vassals, Godfrey of Bouillon, nominally Duke of Lower Lorraine, the Italo-Norman Bohemond of Taranto, Bohemond's nephew Tancred of Hauteville, and Godfrey's brother Baldwin of Boulogne all swore that any territory gained which the Roman Empire had previously held would be handed to Alexios's Byzantine representatives. Only Raymond, the fourth Count of Toulouse, refused this oath, instead promising non-aggression towards Alexios. The Byzantine Tatikios guided the crusade on the arduous 3-month march to besiege Antioch, during which the Franks made alliances with local Armenians. Before reaching Antioch, Baldwin and his men left the main army and headed to the Euphrates River, engaging in local politics and seizing the fortifications of Turbessel and Rwandan, where the Armenian populace welcomed him. Thoros, then ruler of this territory, could barely control or defend Edessa, so he tried to hire the Franks as mercenaries. Later, he went further and adopted Baldwin as his son in a power-share arrangement. In March 1098, a month after Baldwin's arrival, a Christian mob killed Thoros and acclaimed Baldwin as Du, the Byzantine title Thoros had used. Baldwin's position was personal rather than institutional, and the Armenian governance of the city remained in place. Baldwin's nascent county of Edessa consisted of pockets separated from his other holdings of Turbessel, Rwandan and Samosata by the territory of Turkic and Armenian warlords and the Euphrates. As the Crusaders marched towards Antioch, Syrian Muslims asked Sultan Barkieruk for help, but he was engaged in a power struggle with his brother Muhammad Tapa. At Antioch, Bohemond persuaded the other leaders the city should be his if he could capture it, and Alexios did not come to claim it. Alexios withdrew rather than join the siege after Stephen, Count of Blois, who was deserting, told him defeat was imminent. In June 1098, Bohemond persuaded a renegade Armenian tower commander to let the Crusaders into the city. They slaughtered the Muslim inhabitants, and by mistake, some local Christians. The Crusade leaders decided to return Antioch to Alexios, as they had sworn to at Constantinople, but when they learnt of Alexios's withdrawal, Bohemond claimed the city for himself. The other leaders agreed, apart from Raymond, who supported the Byzantine alliance. This dispute resulted in the March stalling in North Syria. The Crusaders were becoming aware of the chaotic state of Muslim politics through frequent diplomatic relations with the Muslim powers. Raymond indulged in a small expedition. He bypassed Shaizar and laid siege to Acre to enforce the payment of a tribute. In Raymond's absence, Bohemond expelled Raymond's last troops from Antioch and consolidated his rule in the developing Principality of Antioch. Under pressure from the poorer Franks, Godfrey and Robert II, Count of Flanders reluctantly joined the eventually unsuccessful siege of Acre. Alexios asked the crusade to delay the march to Jerusalem, so the Byzantines could assist. Raymond's support for this strategy increased division among the crusade leaders and damaged his reputation among ordinary crusaders. The Crusaders marched along the Mediterranean coast to Jerusalem. On the 15th of July 1099, Crusaders took the city after a siege lasting barely longer than a month. Thousands of Muslims and Jews were killed, and the survivors sold into slavery. Proposals to govern the city as an ecclesiastical state were rejected. Raymond refused the royal title, claiming only Christ could wear a crown in Jerusalem. This may have been to dissuade the more popular Godfrey from assuming the throne, but Godfrey adopted the title Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, when he was proclaimed the first Frankish ruler of Jerusalem. In Western Europe, an advocatus was a layman responsible for the protection and administration of church estates. The foundation of these three Crusader states did not change the political situation in the Levant profoundly. Frankish rulers replaced local warlords in the cities, but large-scale colonization did not follow, and the new conquerors did not change the traditional organization of settlements and property in the countryside. The Muslim leaders were massacred or forced into exile, and the natives, accustomed to the rule of well-organized warbands, offered little resistance to their new lords. Western Christianity's canon law recognized that peace treaties and armistices between Christians and Muslims were valid. The Frankish knights regarded the Turkic mounted warlords as their peers, with familiar moral values, and this familiarity facilitated their negotiations with the Muslim leaders. The conquest of a city was often accompanied by a treaty with the neighboring Muslim rulers, who were customarily forced to pay a tribute for the peace. The Crusader States had a special position in Western Christianity's consciousness. Many Catholic aristocrats were ready to fight for the Holy Land, although in the decades following the destruction of the large crusade of 1101 in Anatolia, only smaller groups of armed pilgrims departed for Outremer. The Fatimids' feud with the Seljuks hindered Muslim actions for more than a decade. Outnumbered by their enemies, the Franks remained in a vulnerable position, but they could forge temporary alliances with their Armenian, Arab, and Turkic neighbours. Each Crusader state had its own strategic purpose during the first years of its existence. Jerusalem needed undisturbed access to the Mediterranean. Antioch wanted to seize Cilicia and the territory along the upper course of the Orontes River, and Edessa aspired to control the upper Euphrates Valley. The most powerful Syrian Muslim ruler, Toktakin of Damascus, took a practical approach to dealing with the Franks. His treaties establishing Damascene, Jerusalemite condominiums, shared rule, in debated territories created precedents for other Muslim leaders. In August 1099, Godfrey defeated the Fatimid vizier Al-Afdal Shahanshah at Ascalon. When Daimbert of Pisa, the papal legate, arrived in the Levant with 120 Pisan ships, Godfrey gained much-needed naval support by backing him for the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, as well as granting him parts of Jerusalem and the Pisans a section of the port of Jaffa. Daimbert revived the idea of creating an ecclesiastic principality and extracted oaths of fealty from Godfrey and Bohemond. When Godfrey died in 1100, his retainers occupied the Tower of David to secure his inheritance for his brother Baldwin. Daimbert and Tancred sought Bohemond's help against the Lotharingians, but the Danishmends captured Bohemond under Gazi Gemustigen while securing Antioch's northern marches. Before departing for Jerusalem, Baldwin ceded Edessa to his cousin, Baldwin of Bourg. His arrival thwarted Daimbert, who crowned Baldwin as Jerusalem's first Latin king on Christmas Day 1100. By performing the ceremony, the Patriarch abandoned his claim to rule the Holy Land. Tancred remained defiant to Baldwin until an Antiochene delegation offered him the regency in March 1101. He ceded his Principality of Galilee to the king, but reserved the right to reclaim it as a fief if he returned from Antioch within 15 months. For the next 2 years, Tancred ruled Antioch. He conquered Byzantine Cilicia and parts of Syria. The Fatimid Caliphate attacked Jerusalem in 1101, 1102, and 1105, on the last occasion in alliance with Toktakin. Baldwin repulsed these attacks, and with Genoese, Venetian, and Norwegian fleets conquered all the towns on the Palestinian coast, except Tyre and Ascalon. Raymond laid the foundations of the Fourth Crusader state, the county of Tripoli. He captured Tartus and Gibelet and besieged Tripoli. His cousin William II Jordan continued the siege after Raymond's death in 1105. It was completed in 1109 when Raymond's son Bertrand arrived. Baldwin brokered a deal, sharing the territory between them, until William Jordan's death united the county. Bertrand acknowledged Baldwin's suzerainty, although William Jordan had been Tancred's vassal. When Bohemond was released for a ransom in 1103, he compensated Tancred with lands and gifts. Baldwin of Bourg and his cousin and vassal, Jocelyn of Courtenay, were captured while attacking Ridwan of Aleppo at Haran with Bohemond. Tancred assumed the regency of Edessa. The Byzantines took the opportunity to reconquer Cilicia. They took the port, but not the citadel of Laodicea. Bohemond returned to Italy to recruit allies and gather supplies. Tancred assumed leadership in Antioch, and his cousin Richard of Salerno did the same in Edessa. In 1107, Bohemond crossed the Adriatic Sea and failed in besieging Dyrrhachion in the Balkan Peninsula. The resulting Treaty of Divol forced Bohemond to restore Laodicea and Cilicia to Alexios, become his vassal and reinstate the Greek Patriarch of Antioch. Bohemond never returned. He died, leaving an underage son, Bohemond II. Tancred continued as regent of Antioch and ignored the treaty. Richard's son, Roger of Salerno, succeeded as regent on Tancred's death in 1112. The fall of Tripoli prompted Sultan Muhammad Tapar to appoint the Atabeg of Mosul, Maudud, to wage jihad against the Franks. Between 1110 and 1113, Maudud mounted 4 campaigns in Mesopotamia and Syria, but rivalry among his heterogeneous army's commanders forced him to abandon the offensive on each occasion. As Edessa was Mosul's chief rival, Maudud directed 2 campaigns against the city. They caused havoc, and the county's eastern region could never recover. The Syrian Muslim rulers saw the Sultan's intervention as a threat to their autonomy and collaborated with the Franks. After an assassin, likely a Nizari, murdered Maudud, Muhammad Tapar dispatched 2 armies to Syria, but both campaigns failed. As Aleppo remained vulnerable to Frankish attacks, the city leaders sought external protection. They allied with the adventurous Artukid princes, Ilghazi and Balak, who inflicted crucial defeats on the Franks between 1119 and 1124, but could rarely prevent Frankish counter-invasions. In 1118, Baldwin of Bourg succeeded Baldwin I as king of Jerusalem, naming Jocelyn his successor in Edessa. After Roger was killed at Ager Sanguinis, Field of Blood, Baldwin II assumed the regency of Antioch for the absent Bohemond II. Public opinion attributed a series of disasters affecting the Outremer, defeats by enemy forces and plagues of locusts, as punishments for the Franks' sins. To improve moral standards, the Jerusalemite ecclesiastic and secular leaders assembled a council at Nablus and issued decrees against adultery, sodomy, bigamy, and sexual relations between Catholics and Muslim. A proposal by a group of pious knights about a monastic order for deeply religious warriors was likely first discussed at the Council of Nablus. Church leaders quickly espoused the idea of armed monks, and within a decade, 2 military orders, the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, were formed. As the Fatimid Caliphate no longer posed a major threat to Jerusalem, but Antioch and Edessa were vulnerable to invasion, the defense of the northern Crusader states took much of Baldwin II's time. His absence, its impact on government, and his placement of relatives and their vassals in positions of power created opposition in Jerusalem. Baldwin's 16-month captivity led to a failed deposition attempt by some of the nobility, with the Flemish Count, Charles the Good, considered as a possible replacement. Charles declined the offer. Baldwin had 4 daughters. In 1126, Bohemond reached the age of majority and married the second oldest, Alice, in Antioch. Aleppo had plunged into anarchy, but Bohemond II could not exploit this because of a conflict with Jocelyn. The new Atabeg of Mosul, Ahmad al-Din Zengi, seized Aleppo in 1128. The 2 major Muslim centers' union was especially dangerous for the neighboring Edessa, but it also worried Damascus's new ruler, Taj al-Muluk Buri. Baldwin's eldest daughter, Melisende, was his heir. He married her to Fulk of Anjou, who had widespread Western connections, useful to the kingdom. After Fulk's arrival, Baldwin raised a large force for an attack on Damascus. This force included the leaders of the other Crusader states, and a significant Angevin contingent provided by Fulk. The campaign was abandoned when the Franks' foraging parties were destroyed, and bad weather made the roads impassable. In 1130, Bohemond II was killed raiding in Cilicia, leaving Alice with their infant daughter, Constance. Baldwin II denied Alice control, instead resuming the regency until his death in 1131. On his deathbed, Baldwin named Fulk Melisende and their infant son, Baldwin III, joint heirs. Fulk intended to revoke the arrangement, but his favoritism toward his compatriots roused strong discontent in the kingdom. In 1134, he repressed a revolt by Hugh II of Jaffa, a relative of Melisende, but was still compelled to accept the shared inheritance. He also thwarted frequent attempts by his sister-in-law Alice to assume the regency in Antioch, including alliances with Pons of Tripoli and Jocelyn II of Edessa. Taking advantage of Antioch's weakened position, Leo, a Cilician Armenian ruler, seized the Cilician plain. In 1133, the Antiochene nobility asked Fulk to propose a husband for Constance, and he selected Raymond of Poitiers, a younger son of William III of Aquitaine. Raymond finally arrived in Antioch 3 years later and married Constance. He reconquered parts of Cilicia from the Armenians. In 1137, Pons was killed battling the Damascenes, and Zengi invaded Tripoli. Fulk intervened, but Zengi's troops captured Pons' successor Raymond II and besieged Fulk in the border castle of Montferrand. Fulk surrendered the castle and paid Zengi 50,000 dinars for his and Raymond's freedom. Emperor Alexios' son and successor, John II Komnenos, reasserted Byzantine claims to Cilicia and Antioch. His military campaign compelled Raymond of Poitiers to give homage and agree that he would surrender Antioch by way of compensation if the Byzantines ever captured Aleppo, Homs, and Shaizar for him. The following year, the Byzantines and Franks jointly besieged Aleppo and Shaizar, but could not take the towns. Zengi soon seized Homs from the Damascenes, but a Damascene, Jerusalemite coalition prevented his southward expansion. Jocelyn made an alliance with the Artukid Kara Arslan, who was Zengi's principal Muslim rival in Upper Mesopotamia. While Jocelyn was staying west of the Euphrates at Turbessel, Zengi invaded the Frankish lands east of the river in late 1144. Before the end of the year, he captured the region, including the city of Edessa. Losing Edessa strategically threatened Antioch and limited opportunities for a Jerusalemite expansion in the south. In September 1146, Zengi was assassinated, possibly on orders from Damascus. His empire was divided between his two sons, with the younger Nur ad-Din succeeding him in Aleppo. A power vacuum in Edessa allowed Jocelyn to return to the city, but he was unable to take the citadel. When Nur ad-Din arrived, the Franks were trapped, Jocelyn fled, and the subsequent sack left the city deserted. The fall of Edessa shocked Western opinion, prompting the largest military response since the First Crusade. The new crusade consisted of two great armies, led overland by Louis II of France and Conrad III of Germany, arriving in Acre in 1148. The arduous march had greatly reduced the two rulers' forces. At a leadership conference, including the widowed Melisende and her son Baldwin III, they agreed to attack Damascus rather than attempt to recover distant Edessa. The attack on Damascus ended in a humiliating defeat and retreat. Scapegoating followed the unexpected failure, with many Westerners blaming the Franks. Fewer crusaders came from Europe to fight for the Holy Land in the next decades. Raymond of Poitiers joined forces with the Nizari and Jocelyn with the Rum Seljuks against Aleppo. Nur ad-Din invaded Antioch and Raymond was defeated and killed at Inab in 1149. The next year Jocelyn was captured and tortured, and later died. Beatrice of Saun, his wife, sold the remains of the county of Edessa to the Byzantines with Baldwin's consent. Already 21 and eager to rule alone, Baldwin forced Melisende's retirement in 1152. In Antioch, Constance resisted pressure to remarry until 1153, when she chose the French nobleman Reynaud of Châtillon as her second husband. From 1149, all Fatimid caliphs were children, and military commanders were competing for power. Ascalon, the Fatimids' last Palestinian bridgehead, hindered Frankish raids against Egypt, but Baldwin captured the town in 1153. The Damascenes feared further Frankish expansion, and Nur ad-Din seized the city with ease a year later. He continued to remit the tribute that Damascus's former rulers had offered to the Jerusalemite kings. Baldwin extracted tribute from the Egyptians as well. Reinald lacked financial resources, tortured the Latin Patriarch of Antioch, Emery of Limoges, to appropriate his wealth, and attacked the Byzantine Cilician Armenians. When Emperor Manuel Komnenos delayed the payment he had been promised, Reinald pillaged Byzantine Cyprus. Thierry, Count of Flanders, brought military strength from the west for campaigning. Thierry, Baldwin, Reinald and Raymond, the third of Tripoli, attacked Chisholm. Baldwin offered the city to Thierry, who refused Reinald's demands he become his vassal, and the siege was abandoned. After Nur ad-Din seized Shaizar in 1157, the Nizari remained the last independent Muslim power in Syria. As prospects for a new crusade from the west were poor, the Franks of Jerusalem sought a marriage alliance with the Byzantines. Baldwin married Manuel's niece, Theodora, and received a significant dowry. With his consent, Manuel forced Reinald into accepting Byzantine overlordship. The childless Baldwin III died in 1163. His younger brother Amalric had to repudiate his wife Agnes of Courtenay on grounds of consanguinity before his coronation, but the right of their two children, Baldwin IV and Sibylla, to inherit the kingdom was confirmed. The Fatimid Caliphate had rival viziers, Shawar and Durgam, both eager to seek external support. This gave Amalric and Nur ad-Din the opportunity to intervene. Amalric launched 5 invasions of Egypt between 1163 and 1169, on the last occasion cooperating with a Byzantine fleet, but he could not establish a bridgehead. Nur ad-Din appointed his Kurdish general Shirkuh to direct the military operations in Egypt. Weeks before Shirkuh died in 1169, the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid made him vizier. His nephew Saladin, who ended the Shiite Caliphate when al-Adid died in September 1171. In March 1171, Amalric undertook a visit to Manuel in Constantinople to get Byzantine military support for yet another attack on Egypt. To this end, he swore fealty to the emperor before his return to Jerusalem, but conflicts with Venice and Sicily prevented the Byzantines from campaigning in the Levant. In theory, Saladin was Nur ad-Din's lieutenant, but mutual distrust hindered their cooperation against the Crusader States. As Saladin remitted suspiciously small revenue payments to him, Nur ad-Din began gathering troops for an attack on Egypt, but he died in May 1174. He left an 11-year-old son, As-Salih Ismail al-Malik. Within 2 months, Amalric died. His son and successor, Baldwin IV, was 13 and a leper. The accession of underage rulers led to disunity both in Jerusalem and in Muslim Syria. In Jerusalem, the seneschal Miles of Plancy took control, but unknown assailants murdered him on the streets of Acre. With the baronage's consent, Amalric's cousin, Raymond III of Tripoli, assumed the regency for Baldwin IV as Bailey. He became the most powerful baron by marrying Eschiva of Buras, the richest heiress of the kingdom, and gaining Galilee. Nur ad-Din's empire quickly disintegrated. His eunuch confidant Gumushtekin took As-Salih from Damascus to Aleppo. Gumushtekin's rival, Ibn al-Muqaddam, seized Damascus but soon surrendered it to Saladin. By 1176, Saladin reunited much of Muslim Syria through warring against Gumushtekin and As-Salih's relatives, the Zengids. That same year, Emperor Manuel invaded the Sultanate of Rum to reopen the Anatolian pilgrimage route towards the Holy Land. His defeat at Myriokephalon weakened the Byzantines' hold on Cilicia. Upholding the balance of power in Syria was apparently Raymond's main concern during his regency. When Saladin besieged Aleppo in 1174, Raymond led a relief army to the city. Next year, when a united Zengid army invaded Saladin's realm, he signed a truce with Saladin. Gumushdekin released Reynald of Châtillon and Baldwin's maternal uncle, Jocelyn III of Courtenay, for a large ransom. They hastened to Jerusalem, and Reynald seized Ultra-Jourdain by marrying Stephanie of Milly. As Baldwin, a leper, was not expected to father children, his sister's marriage was to be arranged before his inevitable premature death from the disease. His regent, Raymond, chose William of Montferrat for Sibylla's husband. William was the cousin of both Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and Louis VI of France. In 1176, Baldwin reached the age of 15 and majority, ending Raymond's regency. He revisited plans for an invasion of Egypt and renewed his father's pact with the Byzantines. Manuel dispatched a fleet of 70 galleys plus support ships to Outremer. As William had died and Baldwin's health was deteriorating, the Franks offered the regency and the Egyptian invasion's command to Baldwin's Crusader cousin Philip I, Count of Flanders. He wanted to be free to return to Flanders and rejected both offers. The plan for the invasion was abandoned, and the Byzantine fleet sailed for Constantinople. Baldwin negotiated a marriage between Hugh III, Duke of Burgundy, and Sibylla, but the succession crisis in France prevented him from sailing. Tension between Baldwin's maternal and paternal relatives grew. When Raymond and Bohemond, both related to him on his father's side, came to Jerusalem unexpectedly before Easter in 1180, Baldwin panicked, fearing they had arrived to depose him and elevate Sibylla to the throne under their control. To thwart their coup, he sanctioned her marriage to Guy of Lusignan, a young aristocrat from Poitou. Guy's brother Amaury held the office of Constable of Jerusalem, and their family had close links to the House of Plantagenet. Baldwin's mother and her clique marginalized Raymond Bohemond and the influential Ibelin family. To prepare for a military campaign against the Seljuks of Rum, Saladin concluded a 2-year truce with Baldwin, and after launching a short but devastating campaign along the coast of Tripoli with Raymond. For the first time in the history of Frankish-Muslim relations, the Franks could not set conditions for the peace. Between 1180 and 1183, Saladin asserted his suzerainty over the Artukids, concluded a peace treaty with the Rum Seljuks, seized Aleppo from the Zengids, and re-established the Egyptian navy. Meanwhile, after the truce expired in 1182, Saladin demonstrated the strategic advantage he had by holding both Cairo and Damascus. While he faced Baldwin in Ultra-Jourdain, his troops from Syria pillaged Galilee. The Franks adopted a defensive tactic and strengthened their fortresses. In February 1183, a Jerusalemite assembly levied an extraordinary tax for defense funding. Reynald was the sole Frankish ruler to pursue an offensive policy. He attacked an Egyptian caravan and built a fleet for a naval raid into the Red Sea. Byzantine influence declined after Manuel died in 1180. Bohemond repulsed his Byzantine wife Theodora and married Sibyl, an Antiochene noblewoman with a bad reputation. Patriarch Amaury excommunicated him, and the Antiochene nobles who opposed the marriage fled to the Cilician Armenian prince Reuben III. Saladin granted a truce to Bohemond and made preparations for an invasion of Jerusalem, where Guy took command of the defense. When Saladin invaded Galilee, the Franks responded with what William of Tyre described in his contemporaneous chronicle as their largest army in living memory, but avoided fighting a battle. After days of fierce skirmishing, Saladin withdrew towards Damascus. Baldwin dismissed Guy from his position as bailey, apparently because Guy had proved unable to overcome factionalism in the army. In November 1183, Baldwin made Guy's 5-year-old stepson, also called Baldwin, co-ruler, and had him crowned king while attempting to annul the marriage of Guy and Sibylla. Guy and Sibylla fled to Ascalon, and his supporters vainly intervened on their behalf at a general council. An embassy to Europe was met with offers of money, but not of military support. Already dying, Baldwin IV appointed Raymond Bailey for 10 years, but charged Jocelyn with the ailing Baldwin V's guardianship. As there was no consensus on what should happen if the boy king died, it would be for the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, the kings of France and England, to decide whether his mother Sibylla or her half-sister Isabella had stronger claim to the throne. Bohemond was staying at Acre around this time, allegedly because Baldwin IV wanted to secure Bohemond's support for his decisions on the succession. Back in Antioch, Bohemond kidnapped Reuben of Cilicia and forced him into becoming his vassal. Saladin signed a 4-year truce with Jerusalem and attacked Mosul. He could not capture the city, but extracted an oath of fealty from Mosul's Zengid ruler, Is al-Din Masud, in March 1186. A few months later, Baldwin IV died, and a power struggle began in Jerusalem. Raymond summoned the barons to Nablus to a general council. In his absence, Sibylla's supporters, led by Jocelyn and Reynold, took full control of Jerusalem, Acre, and Beirut. Patriarch Heraclius of Jerusalem crowned her queen and appointed Guy her co-ruler. The barons assembling at Nablus offered the crown to Isabella's husband Humphrey IV of Toron, but he submitted to Sibylla to avoid a civil war. After his desertion, all the barons but Baldwin of Ibelin and Raymond swore fealty to the royal couple. Baldwin went into exile, and Raymond forged an alliance with Saladin. Reynold seized another caravan, which violated the truce and prompted Saladin to assemble his forces for the jihad. Raymond allowed Muslim troops to pass through Galilee to raid around Acre. His shock at the Frankish defeat in the resulting Battle of Cresson brought him to reconciliation with Guy. Guy now gathered a large force, committing all of his kingdom's available resources. The leadership divided on tactics. Reynold urged an offensive, while Raymond proposed defensive caution, although Saladin was besieging his castle at Tiberias. Guy decided to deal with the siege. The march towards Tiberias was arduous, and Saladin's troops overwhelmed the exhausted Frankish army at the Horns of Hattin on July 4, 1187. Hattin was a massive defeat for the Franks. Nearly all the major Frankish leaders were taken prisoner, but only Reynold and the armed monks of the military orders were executed. Raymond was among the few Frankish leaders who escaped captivity. He fell seriously ill after reaching Tripoli. Within months after Hattin, Saladin conquered almost the entire kingdom. The city of Jerusalem surrendered on the 2nd of October, 1187. There were no massacres following the conquest, but tens of thousands of Franks were enslaved. Those who could negotiate a free passage or were ransomed swarmed to Tyre, Tripoli, or Antioch. Conrad of Montferrat commanded the defences of Tyre. He was William's brother and arrived only days after Hattin. The childless Raymond died, and Bohemond's younger son, also called Bohemond, assumed power in Tripoli. After news of the Franks' devastating defeat at Hattin reached Italy, Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade. Passionate sermons raised religious fervour, and it is likely that more people took the Crusader oath than during recruitment for the previous Crusades. Bad weather and growing discontent among his troops forced Saladin to abandon the siege of Tyre and allow his men to return to Iraq, Syria, and Egypt early in 1188. In May, Saladin turned his attention to Tripoli and Antioch. The arrival of William II of Sicily's fleet saved Tripoli. Saladin released Guy on the condition that he go overseas and never bear arms against him. Historian Thomas Asbridge proposes that Saladin likely anticipated that a power struggle between Guy and Conrad was inevitable, and it could weaken the Franks. Indeed, Guy failed to depart for Europe. In October, Bohemond asked Saladin for a 7-month truce, offering to surrender the city of Antioch if help did not arrive. Saladin's biographer Ali ibn al-Athir wrote, after the Frankish castles were starved into submission, that the Muslims acquired everything from as far as Ayla to the furthest districts of Beirut, with only the interruption of Tyre, and also all the dependencies of Antioch, apart from Al-Qusayr. Guy of Lusignan, his brother Amaury, and Gerard de Ridefort, Grand Master of the Templars, gathered about 600 knights in Antioch. They approached Tyre, but Conrad of Montferrat refused them entry, convinced Guy had forfeited his claim to rule when Saladin conquered his kingdom. Guy and his comrades knew Western Crusaders would arrive soon, and risked a token move on Acre in August 1189. Crusader groups from many parts of Europe joined them. Their tactic surprised Saladin and prevented him from resuming the invasion of Antioch. 3 major Crusader armies departed for the Holy Land in 1189-1190. Frederick Barbarossa's crusade ended abruptly in June 1190 when he drowned in the Salef River in Anatolia. Only fragments of his army reached Outremer. Philip II of France landed at Acre in April 1191, and Richard I of England arrived in May. During his voyage, Richard had seized Cyprus from the island's self-declared emperor, Isaac Komnenos. Guy and Conrad had reconciled, but their conflict returned when Sibylla of Jerusalem and her 2 daughters by Guy died. Conrad married the reluctant Isabella, Sibylla's half-sister and heir, despite her marriage to Humphrey of Toron and gossip about his 2 living wives. After an attritional siege, the Muslim garrison surrendered Acre, and Philip and most of the French army returned to Europe. Richard led the crusade to victory at Arsuf, capturing Jaffa, Ascalon and Durham. Internal dissension forced Richard to abandon Guy and accept Conrad's kingship. Guy was compensated with possession of Cyprus. In April 1192, Conrad was assassinated in Tyre. Within a week, the widowed Isabella was married to Henry, Count of Champagne. Saladin did not risk a defeat in a pitched battle, and Richard feared the exhausting march across arid lands towards Jerusalem. As he fell ill and needed to return home to attend to his affairs, a 3-year truce was agreed in September 1192. The Franks kept land between Tyre and Jaffa, but dismantled Ascalon. Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem were allowed. Frankish confidence in the truce was not high. In April 1193, Geoffroy de Donjon, head of the Knights Hospitaller, wrote in a letter, "We know for certain that since the loss of the land, the inheritance of Christ cannot easily be regained. The land held by the Christians during the truces remains virtually uninhabited." The Franks' strategic position was not necessarily detrimental. They kept the coastal towns and their frontiers shortened. Their enclaves represented a minor threat to the Ayyubids' empire in comparison with the Artukids, Zengids, Seljuks of Rum, Cilician Armenians, or Georgians in the north. After Saladin died in March 1193, none of his sons could assume authority over his Ayyubid relatives, and the dynastic feud lasted for almost a decade. The Ayyubids agreed near-constant truces with the Franks and offered territorial concessions to keep the peace. After an attritional siege, the Muslim garrison surrendered Acre, and Philip and most of the French army returned to Europe. Richard led the crusade to victory at Arsuf, capturing Jaffa, Ascalon and Durham. Internal dissension forced Richard to abandon Guy and accept Conrad's kingship. Guy was compensated with possession of Cyprus. In April 1192, Conrad was assassinated in Tyre. Within a week, the widowed Isabella was married to Henry, Count of Champagne. Saladin did not risk a defeat in a pitched battle, and Richard feared the exhausting march across arid lands towards Jerusalem. As he fell ill and needed to return home to attend to his affairs, a 3-year truce was agreed in September 1192. The Franks kept land between Tyre and Jaffa, but dismantled Ascalon. Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem were allowed. Frankish confidence in the truce was not high. In April 1193, Geoffroy de Donjon, head of the Knights Hospitaller, wrote in a letter, "We know for certain that since the loss of the land, the inheritance of Christ cannot easily be regained. The land held by the Christians during the truces remains virtually uninhabited." The Franks' strategic position was not necessarily detrimental. They kept the coastal towns and their frontiers shortened. Their enclaves represented a minor threat to the Ayyubids' empire in comparison with the Artuqids, Zengids, Seljuks of Rum, Cilician Armenians, or Georgians in the north. After Saladin died in March 1193, none of his sons could assume authority over his Ayyubid relatives, and the dynastic feud lasted for almost a decade. The Ayyubids agreed near-constant truces with the Franks and offered territorial concessions to keep the peace. Bohemond III of Antioch did not include his recalcitrant Cilician Armenian vassal Leo in his truce with Saladin in 1192. Leo was Reuben III's brother. When Reuben died, Leo replaced his daughter and heir, Alice. In 1191, Saladin abandoned a 3-year occupation of the northern Syrian castle of Bagras, and Leo seized it, ignoring claims of the Templars and Bohemond. In 1194, Bohemond accepted Leo's invitation to discuss Bagras's return, but Leo imprisoned him, demanding Antioch for his release. The Greek population and the Italian community rejected the Armenians and formed a commune under Bohemond's eldest son, Raymond. Bohemond was released when he abandoned his claims on Cilicia, forfeiting Bagras and marrying Raymond to Alice. Any male heir of this marriage was expected to be the heir to both Antioch and Armenia. When Raymond died in 1197, Bohemond sent Alice and Raymond's posthumous son, Raymond Rupin, to Cilicia. Raymond's younger brother, Bohemond IV, came to Antioch, and the commune recognized him as their father's heir. In September 1197, Henry of Champagne died after falling out a palace window in the kingdom's new capital Acre. The widowed Isabella married Aymery of Lusignan, who had succeeded Guy in Cyprus. Saladin's ambitious brother Al-Adil I reunited Egypt and Damascus under his rule by 1200. He expanded the truces with the Franks and enhanced commercial contacts with Venice and Pisa. Bohemond III died in 1201. The commune of Antioch renewed its allegiance to Bohemond IV, although several nobles felt compelled to support Raymond Rupin and joined him in Cilicia. Leo of Cilicia launched a series of military campaigns to assert Raymond Rupin's claim to Antioch. Bohemond made alliances with Saladin's son, Az-Zahir Ghazi of Aleppo, and with Suleiman II, the Sultan of Rum. As neither Bohemond nor Leo could muster enough troops to defend their Tripolitan or Cilician hinterland against enemy invasions or rebellious aristocrats, and to garrison Antioch simultaneously, the War of the Antiochene Succession lasted for more than a decade. The Franks knew they could not regain the Holy Land without conquering Egypt. The leaders of the Fourth Crusade planned an invasion of Egypt but sacked Constantinople instead. Aymery and Isabella died in 1205. Isabella's daughter by Conrad, Maria of Montferrat, succeeded, and Isabella's half-brother, John of Ibelin, became regent. The regency ended with Maria's marriage in 1210 to John of Brienne, a French aristocrat and experienced soldier. After her death 2 years later, John ruled as regent for their infant daughter, Isabella II. He participated in a military campaign against Cilicia, but it did not damage Leo's power. Leo and Raymond Rupin had exhausted Antioch with destructive raids and occupied the city in 1216. Raymond Rupin was installed as prince, and Leo restored Bagras to the Templars. Raymond Rupin could not pay for the aristocrats' loyalty in his impoverished principality, and Bohemond regained Antioch with local support in 1219. The personal union between Antioch and Tripoli proved lasting, but in fact, both Crusader states disintegrated into small city-states. Raymond Rupen fled to Cilicia, seeking Leo's support, and when Leo died in May, attempted to gain the throne against Leo's infant daughter Isabella. John of Brienne was leader of a gathering crusade, but Frederick II, the ruler of Germany and Sicily, was expected to assume control on his arrival. The papal legate, Cardinal Pelagius, controlled the finances from the west. The Crusaders invaded Egypt and captured Damietta in November 1219. The new Sultan of Egypt, Al-Kamil, repeatedly offered the return of Jerusalem and the Holy Land in exchange for the Crusaders' withdrawal. His ability to implement his truce proposals was questionable, for his brother, Al-Muazzam Isa, ruled the Holy Land. The Crusaders knew that their hold on the territory would not be secure as long as the castles in Ultra-Jordan remained in Muslim hands. Prophecies about their inevitable victory spread in their camp, and Al-Adil's offer was rejected. After 21 months of stalemate, the Crusaders marched on Cairo before being trapped between the Nile floods and the Egyptian army. The Crusaders surrendered Damietta in return for safe conduct, ending the crusade. While staying in Damietta, Cardinal Pelagius sent reinforcements to Raymond Rupen in Cilicia, but Constantine of Babyron, who was regent for the Cilician queen, acted quickly. He captured Raymond Rupen, who died in prison. The queen was married to Bohemon's son, Philip, to cement an alliance between Cilicia and Antioch. A feud between the two nations broke out again after neglected Armenian aristocrats murdered Philip in late 1224. An alliance between the Armenians and his former Ayyubid allies in Aleppo foiled Bohemon's attempts at revenge. Frederick renewed his Crusader oath on his imperial coronation in Rome in 1220. He did not join the Egyptian crusade, but reopened the negotiations with Al-Adil over the city of Jerusalem. In 1225, Frederick married Isabella II and assumed the title of King of Jerusalem. 2 years later, Al-Adil promised to abandon all lands conquered by Saladin in return for Frankish support against Al-Muazzam. An epidemic prevented Frederick's departure for a crusade, and Pope Gregory IX excommunicated him for repeatedly breaking his oath. In April 1228, Isabella died after giving birth to Conrad. Without seeking a reconciliation with the Pope, Frederick sailed for the crusade. His attempts to confiscate baronial fiefs brought him into conflict with the Frankish aristocrats. As Al-Muazzam had died, Frederick made the most of his diplomatic skills to achieve the partial implementation of Al-Adil's previous promise. They signed a truce for 10 years, 10 months and 10 days, the maximum period for a peace treaty between Muslims and Christians, according to Muslim custom. It restored Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth and Sidon to the Franks, while granting Temple Mount to the Muslims. The native Franks were unenthusiastic about the treaty, because it was questionable whether it could be defended. Frederick left for Italy in May 1229 and never returned. He sent Richard Filangieri with an army to rule the Kingdom of Jerusalem as his bailey. The Ibelins denied Frederick's right to appoint his lieutenant without consulting the barons, and Outremer plunged into a civil war known as the War of the Lombards. Filangieri occupied Beirut and Tyre, but the Ibelins and their allies firmly kept Acre and established a commune to protect their interest. Pope Gregory IX called for a new crusade in preparation for the expiry of the truce. Between 1239 and 1241, wealthy French and English nobles like Theobald I of Navarre and Richard of Cornwall led separate military campaigns to the Holy Land. They followed Frederick's tactics of forceful diplomacy and played rival factions off against each other in the succession disputes that followed Al-Kamil's death. Richard's treaty with Al-Kamil's son, As-Salih Ayyub, restored most land west of the Jordan River to the Franks. Conrad reached the age of majority in 1243, but failed to visit Outremer. Arguing that Conrad's heir presumptive was entitled to rule in his absence, the Jerusalemite barons elected his mother's maternal aunt, Alice of Champagne, as regent. The same year, they captured Tyre, the last centre of Frederick's authority in the kingdom. The Mongol Empire's westward expansion reached the Middle East when the Mongols conquered the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia in 1227. Part of the Khwarezmian army fled to eastern Anatolia, and these masterless Turkic soldiers offered their services to the neighboring rulers for pay. Western Christians regarded the Mongols as potential allies against the Muslims, because some Mongol tribes adhered to Nestorian Christianity. In fact, most Mongols were pagans with a strong belief in their great Khan's divine right to universal rule, and they demanded unconditional submission from both Christians and Muslims. As-Salih Ayyub hired the Khwarezmians and garrisoned new Mamluk troops in Egypt, alarming his uncle As-Salih Ismail, emir of Damascus. Ismail bought the Franks' alliance by a promise to restore all the lands that Saladin had reconquered. Catholic priests took possession of the Dome of the Rock, but in July 1244, Khwarezmians marching towards Egypt sacked Jerusalem unexpectedly. The Franks gathered all available troops and joined Ismail near Gaza, but the Khwarezmians and Egyptians defeated the Frankish and Damascene coalition at La Fourby on the 18th of October. Few Franks escaped from the battlefield. As-Salih captured most of the Crusaders' mainland territory, restricting the Franks to a few coastal towns. Louis, IX of France, launched a failed crusade against Egypt in 1249. He was captured near Damietta with the remnants of his army, and ransomed days after the Bahri Mamluks assumed power in Egypt through murdering As-Salih's son Al-Muazzam Turanshah in May 1250. Louis spent 4 more years in Outremer. As the kingdom's effective ruler, he conducted negotiations with both the Syrian Ayyubids and the Egyptian Mamluks and refortified the coastal towns. He sent an embassy from Acre to the great Khan Guyuk, offering an anti-Muslim alliance to the Mongols. Feuds between rival candidates to the regency and commercial conflicts between Venice and Genoa resulted in a new civil war in 1256, known as the War of St. Sabas. The pro-Venetian Bohemian VI conflict with his Genoese vassals, the Embriaci, brought the war to Tripoli and Antioch. In 1258, the Ilkhan Hulagu, younger brother of the great Khan Menka, sacked Baghdad and ended the Abbasid Caliphate. 2 years later, Hethum I of Cilicia and Bohemond VI joined forces with the Mongols in the sack of Aleppo, when Bohemond set fire to its mosque, and in the conquest of northern Syria. The Mongols emancipated the Christians from their dhimmi status, and the local Christian population cooperated with the conquerors. Jerusalem remained neutral when the Mamluks of Egypt moved to confront the Mongols after Hulagu, and much of his force moved east on the death of Monkir to address the Mongol succession. The Mamluks defeated the greatly reduced Mongol army at Ain Jalut. On their return, the Mamluk Sultan Qutuz was assassinated and replaced by the general Baybars. Baybars revived Saladin's empire by uniting Egypt and Syria, and held Hulagu in check through an alliance with the Mongols of the Golden Horde. 192. He reformed governance in Egypt, giving power to the elite Mamluks. The Franks did not have the military capability to resist this new threat. A Mongol garrison was stationed at Antioch, and individual Frankish barons concluded separate truces with Baybars. Determined to conquer the Crusader States, he captured Caesarea and Arsuf in 1265 and Safed in 1266, and sacked Antioch in 1268. Jaffa surrendered, and Baybars weakened the military orders, by capturing the castles of Crac de Chevalier and Montfort, before returning his attention to the Mongols of the Ilkhanate for the rest of his life. Massacres of the Franks and native Christians regularly followed a Mamluk conquest. In 1268, the new Sicilian king Charles I of Anjou executed Conradin, the titular king of Jerusalem, in Naples after his victory at Tagliacozzo. Isabella I's great-grandson Hugh III of Cyprus and her granddaughter Maria of Antioch disputed the succession. The barons preferred Hugh, but in 1277, Maria sold her claim to Charles. He sent Roger of San Severino to act as Bailey. With the support of the Templars, he blocked Hugh's access to Acre, forcing him to retreat to Cyprus, again leaving the kingdom without a resident monarch. The Mongols of the Ilkhanate sent embassies to Europe proposing anti-Mamluk alliances, but the major Western rulers were reluctant to launch a new crusade for the Holy Land. The War of the Sicilian Vespers weakened Charles's position in the West. After his death in 1285, Henry II of Cyprus was acknowledged as Jerusalem's nominal king, but the Rump Kingdom was in fact a mosaic of autonomous lordships, some under Mamluk suzerainty. In 1285, the death of the warlike Ilkhan Abaka, combined with the Pisan and Venetian wars with the Genoese, finally gave the Mamluk Sultan, Al-Mansur Qalawun, the opportunity to expel the Franks. In 1289, he destroyed Genoese-held Tripoli, enslaving or killing its residents. In 1290, Italian crusaders broke his truce with Jerusalem by killing Muslim traders in Acre. Qalawun's death did not hinder the successful Mamluk siege of the city in 1291. Those who could fled to Cyprus, while those who could not were slaughtered or sold into slavery. Without hope of support from the West, Tyre, Beirut, and Sidon all surrendered without a fight. The Mamluk policy was to destroy all physical evidence of the Franks. The destruction of the ports and fortified towns ruptured the history of a coastal city civilization rooted in antiquity. Modern historiography has focused on the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Possibly, this is related to it being the objective of the First Crusade, as well as the perception of the city being the center and chief city of medieval Christendom. However, research into the kingdom does not provide a comprehensive common template for the development of the other Latin settlements. Jerusalem's royal administration was based in the city until it was lost, and then in Acre. It featured the typical household officers of most European rulers: a cleric-led chancery, constable, marshal, chamberlain, chancellor, seneschal, and butler. Royal territory was directly administered by viscounts. All tangible evidence of the written law was lost in 1187, when the Franks lost the city of Jerusalem to the Muslims. The courts of the princes of Antioch were similar and created the Italo-Norman laws that were also later adopted by Cilician Armenia, known as the Assizes of Antioch. These have survived in 13th century Armenian translations. Relationships among Antioch's various Frankish, Syrian, Greek, Jewish, Armenian, and Muslim inhabitants were generally good. The brief existence of the uniquely landlocked Edessa means it is the least studied, but its history is traceable to Armenian and Syriac chronicles in addition to Latin sources. Like Jerusalem, the political institutions appear to have reflected the northern French roots of the founders, although the membership of city councils included indigenous Christians. The population was diverse, including Armenian Orthodox, Greeks known as Melkites, Syrian Orthodox known as Jacobites, and Muslims. In Tripoli, the fourth Frankish state, Raymond of St. Gilles and his successors ruled directly over several towns, granting the rest as fiefs to lords originating in Languedoc and Provence, and Gibelais was given to the Genoese in return for naval support. In the 12th century, this system provided a total of 300 knights, a much smaller army than Antioch or Jerusalem. Architectural and artistic activity in Lebanese churches provide evidence that the indigenous populations prospered under Frankish rule, in part due to its remoteness from the worst impacts of Saladin's conquests in 1187-1188. These were Arabic-speaking Melkites, Monophysites, Nestorians, Syrians, and large numbers of Syriac-speaking Maronites with their own clerical hierarchies. The Greek Orthodox Church was restricted as in Jerusalem. There were similar self-governing Muslim communities of Druze and Alawites, including Ismaili, in the frontier areas to the north. The multi-ethnic structure may well have been more pronounced in Tripoli, and in the 12th century there may have been a southern French culture, although this characteristic faded over time. The King of Jerusalem's foremost role was as leader of the feudal host during the near-constant warfare in the early decades of the 12th century. The kings rarely awarded land or lordships, and those they did frequently became vacant and reverted to the crown because of the high mortality rate. Their followers' loyalty was rewarded with city incomes. Through this, the domain of the first 5 rulers was larger than the combined holdings of the nobility. These kings of Jerusalem had greater internal power than comparative Western monarchs, but they lacked the personnel and administrative systems necessary to govern such a large realm.